Okay, this is called Mother Weaver by Samantha Corbridge. Samantha's dedication to Mother, Emma, and all our mothers throughout history. Mother's Serenade of Generations. A cloak of generations flows, follows, frees, linking hands and hearts by the master weaver. The world would have us feel separated. It would have us feel alone. It would have us believe the lie. It will do anything to break us. The Mother Weaver is greater than the world. She is wisdom. She is breath. She is life. Her stitches strengthen, repair, when the world would tear and break. The weary daughter travels the distance, her cloak and strength tattered and worn. She puts down the world, steps into the sunset, and invites the song of the weaver. Songs of our sisters, mothers, grandmothers, weave, mingle, merge with her melody. The creation song washes over daughter. Mother dances and weaves as the harmony swells. Daughter steps into the sunrise, out of the dark night, renewed, replenished, reborn. The tattered threads transformed, now gold and silver and light. The cloak of generations flows, follows, frees, linking hands and hearts. The Mother Weaver enfolds us in her love.
Good morning. I was given a talk written by Fawn Livesey and asked to present that today. And I'll do my best to speak clearly. And I wanted to tell you this talk is called Bold Women, Rahab, Tamar, and Abish. Today I want to focus on some of the courageous women in scriptures. There are many. Mother Mary, of course, with all she endured as the mother of Jesus on earth, and all she is a mother to all of us. Mary Magdalene, also our mother, who suffered along with her spouse through the atonement which delivers us from the death of the body, and all who will be delivered from death of the spirit. Eve, Sara, and Emma Smith, who among other things suffered the loss of several children, and her spouse, all before she reached the age of 40. Bathsheba, Sariah, the daughter of Ishmael, and her mother, who pled for Nephi's life, the women who went into the fire along with their children, as we read about in Alma in the Book of Mormon. The daughters of the Lamanites who, though they had been taken by force as wives, pled for the lives of their husbands, as written about in Mosiah. Deborah and Anna, the prophetesses, the widow who was willing to give her last meal and oil to feed the stranger, Elijah, and many, many others. Three women I want to focus on today specifically are Rahab, from the city of Jericho, Tamar, and this is Judah's daughter-in-law, who married his son, and Abish, in the Book of Mormon. Some aspects of these three women's stories we might find to be disturbing from a certain perspective. What I hope we can focus on today, regardless of what others might think, is the courage with these women acted and their faith. In other words, I hope we can suspend any judgment of their choices and extend mercy and gratitude for what they did and what they chose to do and how they chose to act to the best of their knowledge and ability as they each face difficult and even life-threatening circumstances. Rahab is the first woman I want to focus on. If you look up Rahab in the Bible, there are two references. Some are to this woman specifically, meaning wide and spacious, and other Hebrew words sound like the word pride. Here are some words I would use to describe Rahab: discerning, clever, protective, discreet, and willing. Here is Rahab's story in brief. God was ready to bring the Israelites out of the wilderness and into the land of Canaan. He had covenanted with Abraham, saying, "And I will give unto you and your seed after you the land wherein you are a stranger, all of the land of Canaan, for an everlasting possession." The land of Canaan, as you remember, was peopled by the descendants of Canaan, who were from the son of Ham, who was Noah's son, so Noah's grandson. Some of the people were giants, and unfortunately, most of the people were very wicked. They were idolatrous, they offered their children as sacrifices, they engaged in many sexual sins, fortune-telling, and witchcraft. Rahab is identified in the text as a harlot, which may be true in the traditional sense, but it's likely that she was also an innkeeper, and I think of maybe someone who ran an Airbnb back in the day, having strange men in and out of her house day and night, possibly. At least the consonants in Hebrew that are used in the word prostitute are the same consonants for a female who gives food and provision. So there is a debate about whether or not she actually was a harlot. But I personally don't think it matters. Whether Rahab had been a prostitute or not, she repented. And she recognized the wickedness of her people in Jericho, identifying the one true God, testifying to that knowledge, and then helping the Israelite spies. For when they came, she said to the men, "I know that the Lord has given you this land, and that your terror has fallen upon us, and that all the inhabitants of the land faint because of you. We have heard how the Lord dried up the water of the Red Sea for you, and what you did to the 2 kings of the Amorites, whom you utterly destroyed. As soon as we had heard these things, our hearts did melt. Neither did there remain any more courage in any man here, for the Lord your God in heaven above and in the earth beneath is with you." One more time, Rahab stated, "For the Lord your God, he is the God in heaven above and the earth beneath." She shows discernment. So believing that the Israelites should prevail and would prevail, she hides the spies of the Israelites on the roof of her house, and she hides them under the stalks of flax like a covering. When the king's men come, she sends them in another direction, and she makes arrangements to save herself and her family, and eventually she helps these spies go down the wall on a cord. She shows her cleverness and protection of her family. To show the Israelites which house to protect, she puts a scarlet thread out her window, and she asks her family to come to her home, and she does not speak about the imminent attack. This shows discretion. Rahab puts the scarlet line out of her window. The Israelites march around the city as instructed, once a day for 6 days, and then 7 times on the 7th day, and the walls of Jericho fall down. And Rahab and her parents and her brothers and sisters are all saved. The text reads, "And Joshua saved Rahab alive, her father's household and all she had. And she dwells in Israel even unto this day, because she hid the messengers whom Joshua sent to spy out Jericho." Rahab was willing to live a different life, to be in Israel. At least it is my assumption that she would no longer be a harlot, if she indeed ever was a harlot. Her choice for God becomes a choice for a completely new way of life. There is even the possibility that Rahab is the mother of Boaz. Boaz, who later marries Ruth, as in Matthew. Salmon begat Boaz of Rahab. If that is true, that puts Rahab in the lineage of Jesus Christ. Here are a few interesting things, maybe uncomfortable, that I took from this story. Number 1, Rahab was doing her regular work, which allowed these things to happen. Whether she was a harlot in the traditional sense, I do not know. It was because she had a house that was open to strangers that she was saved. Remember how God called Abraham a stranger? Consider Isaiah 27, where the Lord instructs, "Is this not the fast that I have chosen? Is it not to deal your bread to the hungry, that you bring the poor and cast them into your home?" In the culture of the day, it is my understanding that even enemies should be received with hospitality. Rahab was also able to hide the spies because she was doing the regular work of drying flaxseed on the roof of her home, and the flaxseed was a covering to the spies so that they weren't seen by the king. I think this demonstrates something that a woman, and particularly how the Lord can use a way with women. For the Lord says, out of small things proceeds something which is great. Note that flax is used to make linen, and linen is used to make a covering. Number 2, Rahab did lie. She tells the king's messengers, there came men unto me, but I knew not from where they came. And it came to pass about the time of shutting the gate, when it was dark, that the men went out. Where the men went, I know not. Pursue after them quickly, for you shall overtake them. I suspect she did the best she knew how, given the circumstances. She wanted to save her family. But also, again, for that time and place, there was a cultural expectation that if you hosted someone in your home, even an enemy, they should expect your protection. Think about Lot. We see this protection again when Rahab brings her family into her home. Number 3, Rahab made a compact with the spies, and they, with her knowing that others of the city would be killed, this is what the account says. And they utterly destroyed all who were in the city, both men and women, young and old, ox, sheep, and ass, with the edge of a sword. And in Joshua 2:3, it says, and they burned the city with fire, and all that was therein, everyone in the city. This agreement and the act of placing the scarlet line out of her window is reminiscent of the Passover, where the doorposts were marked with blood, to indicate that the Lord should pass over that house as a protected home. This also makes me think of future destructions that we may face, and the obedience to covenants that will perhaps place a mark and allow some to be protected against the coming seasons. The Lord states, the time is short and I come quickly. Therefore open your mouths and warn others to flee the wrath which is to come, as men in anger destroy one another. The wicked shall destroy the wicked, and I will hold the peacemakers in the palm of my hands, and none can take them from me. Note that peacemaking is one of the ways the Lord will identify those who will be protected. And number 4, Rahab is remembered in Scripture as a woman of faith, and she was a peacemaker. The epistle in Hebrew states, by faith the harlot Rahab perished not with them who believed not, when she had received the spies with peace. The epistle of Jacob states, Rahab, the harlot, was justified by works when she had received the messengers and sent them out another way. 5, where the other Rahab references are associated with pride, this story is a great illustration of how this Rahab put down pride. The wide and broad meaning of Rahab's name makes me think that she gave herself and God gave her, as he also gives us, enough room to change. Whatever else we may think of Rahab's story, it demonstrates how the Lord can save believers, and that Rahab was necessarily courageous. It demonstrates that pride can give way to humility, and it doesn't matter what we have done, it matters what we will do now, today. And it demonstrates the importance for us today to discern the wickedness around us and be willing to acknowledge the true God and live peacefully with God as his chosen people. Tamar is the second woman I would like to tell you about. Tamar lived earlier than Rahab, and there were 3 women in the Bible named Tamar. One is the mother of Maacah, who married King Rehoboam. One is the daughter of King David, who was raped by her half-brother. And the one that we are discussing, who predates both of these Tamars, is the daughter-in-law of Judah, one of the sons of Leah and Jacob, and one of the heads of the 12 tribes of Israel. Here are some words I would like to use to describe Tamar. She was a woman in mourning. She was knowledgeable. She was determined. She was perceptive. And she was blessed. Here's her story. It's a very difficult story. Judah had 3 sons. Tamar was married to Judah's oldest brother, who was a very wicked man, wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord slew him. So Judah, the father, gave Tamar to his second son. His name was Onan, who apparently did not want to raise up children in his brother's name, so he either would not lie with her or according to Scripture, spilled his seed on the floor. And the thing which he did displeased the Lord, wherefore he slew him also. Now Judah had a third son, named Shelah, but he is very afraid to give Tamar to his youngest son, Shelah, because he could die too. So Judah decides to direct Tamar to go to her father's house and just wait for Shelah to grow up. This shows that Tamar is likely in mourning from her 2 husbands who died. She had 2 wicked husbands, both died, and she was rejected and given to another husband. It's my understanding that in this culture, she might be rejected by others as well, since it may have appeared that she was cursed or possibly barren, and thus now she has no husband and no children to care for her. She was also apparently expected to remain a widow until Shelah was grown. In other words, she had no recourse but to wait and hope. However, even when Shelah was grown, Judah does not give Tamar to him as his wife. But Tamar knows that the tradition and her rights under that tradition mean that Shelah should be given to her as a spouse so that she can have children. This custom would later become a part of the law of Moses, and there would be a procedure by which a man could refuse to marry his deceased brother's spouse. This is in Deuteronomy 7. Tamar would also have known about the promises made to Abraham regarding his seed being as numerous as the sands of the sea, and that Judah would be the tribe through which the Messiah would come. Consider Jacob and Israel's blessing upon Judah, and I quote, "The scepter shall not depart from Judah, nor a lawgiver from between his feet, and Shiloh will come." Tamar was most likely very knowledgeable about these things, so Tamar creates a plan. When she is told where Judah will be traveling, this is her father-in-law, she removes her widow's garments, she veils herself with a covering, and places herself by the roadside as though she were a harlot. When Judah, whose wife has died, passes by, he does not recognize Tamar, and he says to her, "Come, I pray you, let me come and lie with you." They negotiate what Judah should give her as payment. A kid from the flock will be brought, and a pledge. In the meantime, he pledges his signet, his bracelets, and his staff, and he gives it to her, and came in and slept with her, and she conceives by him. There is no doubt here that Tamar is agreeing to have intercourse with Judah in an exchange for goods. This demonstrates that Tamar was determined, even willing to go to extreme lengths to bear children according to the social expectations of her day and the protection of women. Whether she considered the prophecy about the Messiah, we do not know. But several things happened. Judah sends his friend Hira to deliver this kid and regain his property. But no one knew of any harlot in the area, and no one can find her. So the transaction is not completed, and Judah is concerned now about being shamed. Completing the promise will remove his shame. Meanwhile, someone tells Judah that his daughter-in-law has acted the part of a harlot, which he never connects with himself, and that she is pregnant. Judah sends for Tamar to bring her into him to be burned. But when she gets there, she brings Judah's belongings, and she tells Judah, "By the man whose these are, am I with child?" And she said, "Discern, I pray you, whose are these? The signet, the bracelet, and the staff." This shows Tamar has perception enough to receive specific tokens from Judah that she asked for that could never be mistaken as belonging to anyone else. And she foresaw enough to know that her actions would cause great controversy that would need to have a point of reconciliation. So Judah acknowledges what has occurred, and he says to Tamar, "She has been more righteous than I, because I gave her not Shelah, my son, as agreed upon." He no longer had sexual relations with her, but Tamar is blessed with 2 children, Perez and Zerah, twins. Perez is the son listed in the genealogy of Jesus, so Jesus Christ came through this situation. Judah begot Perez and Zerah of Tamar. Prophecy holds true down through Joseph, who is now the husband of Mary. Here are a few additional thoughts about this story of Tamar. 1. Tamar lost 2 husbands, and then she gained 2 sons. This is reminiscent of Job's story. 2. The symbol of the veil disguising Tamar, a covering, in exchange for tokens of kingship, as well as God's displeasure with Judah's older sons, indicates that heaven intervened in various ways that these children could be born and the prophecy be fulfilled. Consider that the veil obscures what is true and often what is godly. A signet is a ring or a medallion that's hung about the neck, and it means to sign or seal documents, covenants. Bracelets are the cord or the binding by which the seal is carried. And a staff is an indication of what tribe you're from. Your branch or vine, a rod of chastisement, a rod of knowledge and authority. It also represents the word of God. Judah gave these things into Tamar's hands, almost as though he was placing his family's marks and promises upon her. There is even a pun and more possible symbolism with the young goat. Translated into English, I will send you a kid from the flock. Judah offers to give her a kid. A goat is also often an offering to the Lord, and in a way, Tamar was anointed a queen by receiving these emblems. But think for a moment about the kinds of queenship or kingship that will mark us as potentially Zion material. Consider the example of our Savior and King who says, I am among you as he who serves. 3. When Judah's friend is sent to deliver the kid, the little goat, upon not finding a harlot, he asks about her to the people in that place. But in the text, the word for harlot is now changed from zana, which means one who has sex for money, to the word kadesha, which is one who has sex for religious purposes. 4, like in the story of Rahab, there is also a scarlet thread in this story, a thread that's tied to the wrist of Zerah. During childbirth, which brings up more images of blood, sacrifice, and a sort of Passover, as the younger son, Perez, breaches or passes over his brother to be born first, although Zerah was initially deemed to be the oldest. And 5, there is a psalm that reads, the righteous shall flourish like a palm tree. This is in Psalms 92, verse 3. Did you know that Tamar's name means palm tree? Palm tree branches were also used when Jesus entered Jerusalem. I also read one account of how Tamar is representative of the Gentiles, which may be interesting to contemplate and do further study on. Although Tamar played the harlot, she was functioning as one still worthy to be one of the women in the lineage of Christ. Her courage and determination demonstrate to Judah his waywardness in not following his law, though apparently because of fear. Therefore, her actions encourage us not to fear, but instead believe in God and that he will make a way where there is no way. Before we move on to one of my favorite stories of all Scripture, let's also recognize that both Rahab and Tamar evoke God's mercy. Both are associated with harlotry. Both have their lives at stake. Each story has both literal blood spilled via death and via birth, and figurative symbols of life and blood. And both talk about a covering. Both women contract with signs and tokens under sacrifice and difficult circumstances to help bring about the cause of salvation. And both of these women took huge risks to make a sacrifice in exchange for their families' lives. The last story is the story of Abish. This is a significantly different story to demonstrate mercy from the Lord. Whereas in the other stories, they demonstrate the importance of a covering or protection, this story demonstrates the importance and power of uncovering, or in other words, unveiling or revelation. Abish is one of only 6 women mentioned in the Book of Mormon. 3 of those women, Mary, the mother of Christ, Eve, and Sara, did not live across the sea in the New World. The other 3, those who lived during the Book of Mormon times and places, are Sara, the mother of Lehi, Isabel the harlot, and Abish. She was the Lamanite servant. Of course, many more women are mentioned, and I don't discount their stories. They're just not mentioned like Abish by name. So here are some words I would use to describe Abish. She was faithful, very courageous, humble, charitable, tender-hearted, and bold. Here's her story. Abish was a servant to the Lamanite queen, specifically the wife of King Lamoni. We come to know a little about her during an extraordinary event that happened with Ammon, the king and the queen, and all of the servants, but Abish herself. They're all overcome by the power of God. Ammon had actually only been in service of this king for 3 days. When he went with the king's servants to tend the flocks and defended them against other Lamanites seeking to plunder their animals. This is where we hear about the famous scene where Ammon smote off as many of their arms as were lifted against him. The king was so impressed with his strength and dedication, he was willing to engage with Ammon in a dialogue and learn about the Great Spirit. So Ammon was filled with the Spirit of God, and he began to teach King Lamoni. And after hearing Ammon recount all the scriptures of the plan of redemption and the coming of Christ, King Lamoni began to cry. He cried unto the Lord, and he fell to the earth as if he were dead. The king was also at this point under the power of God. Ammon knew this. He had seen this power before because he'd been with the brothers, with Alma, the younger, when the angel of the Lord appeared to them, and they fell to the earth. So the servant knocked out king to the queen, and after 2 days and 2 nights, the queen calls for Ammon to explain whether or not this king is dead. And Ammon reassures her, he is not dead. He will rise again. Now, we don't know via scripture, but Abish was probably aware of things going on because she was privy to this conversation, being the servant to the queen. What we do know and have in record is that Abish is there the next day when the king indeed does rise, and he reaches out his hand to the queen and testifies of God, saying, "Blessed be the name of God, and blessed art thou, for as sure as thou livest, behold, I have seen my Redeemer, and he shall come forth and be born of a woman, and he shall redeem all mankind who believe on his name." We know Abish is there because the king sinks down again out of joy, and then the queen is overpowered with the Spirit. Ammon begins to pray and is also overpowered with joy, and the servants who had testified of Ammon's strength call on the name of the Lord, and they are so overcome that only one is left standing, and apparently that's Abish herself. It seems to be by divine design that this servant is left alone to determine what happens next, because Abish had been converted to the Lord for many years on account of a remarkable vision of her father, who was also converted to the Lord. She was a quiet believer, and she believed her father. She was a believer in a society where God seems to have become, at best, a mythical hope. This demonstrates that Abish was faithful, and we know that it is by faith that miracles are wrought, so it doesn't seem too much to say that many of the things that occur next are the effects of this woman's faith. Abish knew it was God's power, and believed that if people also held this scene, it would cause them to believe in the power of God. Therefore, she ran. She ran from house to house, making it known unto the people. This shows Abish was full of courage. She was only a servant. She allowed the knowledge of her heart to direct her actions. She was willing to go and speak even though she was only a servant, even though she might be ridiculed or perhaps punished. Abish ran from house to house to call others to come and witness this power of God. This shows she was charitable. She was concerned about others. Unfortunately, many of the people who came began to contend and cast blame. Some even believed that Ammon was the cause of this great evil. Others thought it was the king's fault. One brother of the plundering Lamanites raised his sword to smite Ammon, and he fell down dead. When Abish returned and saw this contention and the bitterness in their hearts and their fear and their guilt, the scriptures say she was exceedingly sorrowful, even unto tears. This shows that Abish was tender-hearted, even broken-hearted. And now we see that despite the crowd and the anger and their suspicion and threatenings with swords and the death of one who attempted to kill Ammon, and despite being a lowly servant, we see that Abish was bold. And in her sorrow and hope, it came to pass she went and took the queen by the hand, that perhaps she might raise her from the ground. And as soon as Abish touched her hand, the queen arose and stood upon her feet and cried with a loud voice, saying, "O blessed Jesus, who has saved me from this awful hell, O blessed God, have mercy on me and this people." The queen is filled with joy. She speaks in tongues. She takes King Lamoni by the hand, who then begins to rebuke and teach his people. And then we hear nothing more about Abish. This to me demonstrates she was humble. It doesn't seem that she sought for honor or position in this new faith where many declared unto the people that they had seen angels and conversed with them, and thus they had told them things of God and his righteousness. Though the text does say that when Ammon arose, he administered unto them, and also did all the servants of Lamoni. So I believe Abish probably did speak to and teach those who might hear. But in the face of this incredible occurrence, it seems likely that Abish also slipped quietly back into her role as just a servant to her mistress, the queen. Abish again was a servant in the queen's household. This speaks much about her character even before the conversions. Among other things, she would never be a servant to the queen unless she was fully trusted. Like you and I, Abish comes from a privileged lineage of those who have experienced spiritual guidance in the wilderness. Abish was likely an Ishmaelite. Remember that Ishmael's heart had been softened by the Lord, sufficient for him to take his family and go with Lehi's family into the wilderness. That's pretty incredible to just up and go like that from Jerusalem when things are looking like everything's fine. Although not all of Ishmael's family were happy with that decision, perhaps coming from the heritage of some who believed in something so incredible and followed through, allowed Abish and her father to have equally soft hearts. This is a good lesson for all of us. Perhaps we should both take courage in what our ancestors have done and also take courage and live our faith as an additional example to our own descendants. For Moroni indicates that those who have given up unto the hardness of their hearts and the blindness of their minds, they will be destroyed. See Ether 6:17 for more information. Therefore, soft hearts and eyes to see are additional markers to show the destroying angels will pass over us. For example, if we are commanded to teach our children and recover the lost sheep, we should do just that, as Ammon did. Ammon, like his brothers, like Alma the elder and Alma the younger, and the king Lamoni, and Abish, a female servant, had also had the dark veil of unbelief cast from their minds. Abish was able to recognize God's power and use her literal mouth and feet and hands to aid in the work the Lord had commenced among the Lamanites, symbolizing in contrast to the Lamanites who actually lost their arms fighting. When I was younger, I didn't believe God would put me in such a frightful and dangerous circumstance as Abish. What I believe now is that doing so would be one more act of mercy on the part of the Lord, because it would mean God is willing to overlook my faults and see me through my potential errors enough to take part in his good works. In other words, such circumstances, as frightening as they might be, give us opportunities to prove our faith and trust in the Lord. If you feel you are faced with an impossible situation, consider perhaps that God is giving you an opportunity to be an Abish. Consider also what the Lord has said. Trust my words. Proceed always in faith. Be believing with me that all things are possible. Abish is a name that means father is a man. This makes me think of a remark that Joseph Smith made when he said, "The Father has a body of flesh and bones, as tangible as man's. The Son also, but the Holy Ghost has not a body of flesh and bones, but is a personage of spirit. The Father is made as a personage of spirit, glory and power, of something that is more refined and pure, but is absolutely comprised of something, which is matter. Denver Snuffer, in his second lecture on faith, page 22. The stories of Abish and Rahab and Tamar are not just stories. These are real people. And these are real stories and real circumstances with real women who had to make real and consequential choices. We, both men and women today, might be considered idolaters or having our minds darkened, insomuch that we forego goodness for the things of this world. For us to have the courage is to live according to the state of our heart and be firm in our convictions, which are hopefully based on godly principles, and then we must act in faith. There have been times, and there will continue to be times, when each of us has to choose whether to stay the course with the wicked of the day, whether to protect the enemy, whether to lose hope when everything seems against us, whether to believe in God's word, whether to embrace the truth when every person around you denies it, or whether to act in faith or give in to your fear. We also need to be willing to invite God to use our homes, our wombs, our hands, and our faith to do this work. God, after all, cares about everyone. God cares about the harlot and the virtuous woman. God cares about the stranger and about his children. God cares about the married wife and the unmarried woman. He cares about the widow. He cares about the fatherless. God cares about the servant and the monarchy and the kings and queens. Indeed, as the Lord states, remember, the worth of souls is great in the sight of God. For behold, the Lord your Redeemer suffered death in the flesh, wherefore he suffered pain of all men, and all men and women might repent and come unto him. As Nephi states, he inviteth them all to come up unto him and partake of his goodness, and he denieth none that come to him. Black and white, bond and free, male and female. He remembereth the heathen, and all are alike unto God. I recently discovered Proverbs chapter 1, verse 41, which reads in part, "The fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom, and the knowledge of the holy and understanding." In other words, we gain wisdom by fearing God, repenting and respecting God's law. We gain understanding as we obey, and thus we gain knowledge of what is holy. For the Lord says, "Do my works, and you will know my doctrine." You will uncover mysteries, hidden mysteries, by obedience to these things that can be uncovered in no other way. This is why I will restore knowledge to my people. One final point I think is very significant. The Lord's law, his work and his doctrine make a way for the stranger, the widow, and the fatherless. He indicates that there is enough grain and oil and wine and to spare. Such is the economy of God, that when we sacrifice for others, God pours out blessings, and when we are not covetous over the temporal and spiritual gifts that God has provided to us, we find that there is plenty for all. In the stories recounted here, look at how God protected Rahab, a stranger, in his ways, and how Rahab also protected strangers. Look how God protected Tamar, a widow, and how Tamar also protected what would be a widowed church without her contributions and preparations. Look at how God protected Abish and her father by fathering them and becoming their God when they were fatherless. And look how God protected and informed the Lamanites and Ishmaelites who had lost the knowledge and direction of their heavenly Father. Abish also protects the knowledge given her and keeps it from others until it is the correct time for her to help. And then she shares that knowledge. And thus, she also gives the fatherless an opportunity to have a father and a mother and a redeemer. Like these women, we can also protect and reveal, for we cannot abuse the stranger, the widow, the fatherless, or the poor and be clean. In a way, until we know Christ, we are ourselves strangers, widows, and fatherless. We must then do unto others what we wish to receive, which gives our heavenly family leeway to pour out light upon us as they did. Rahab, Tamar, and Abish, as each gained a godly family. We must value the Lord and share our love for that Lord in our home, in our families, with our companions. We must not abuse ourselves for our past choices. but we need to change when we've gained greater knowledge, understanding, and light. And in this way, if we will stand in holy places, ready to meet the bridegroom, we will be peacemakers. If we will serve, if we will allow God's light to show us things as they truly are and soften our hearts and share what we have gained, if we will turn from our wicked ways and be baptized in the name of Christ and receive a remission of our sins and the gift of the Holy Ghost, we will also help keep the Passover and consume every part of the Lamb of God. Thank you for letting me share these thoughts today.
Hello, dear ladies. I hope you're having a lovely conference. I'm sorry I am not able to be there in person. My degree is such that it is an all-in proposition. So this is the best I could do. And actually, this even is a stretch. But even as I speak, I realize this is pre-recorded. But would you just have a prayer? Let's just take a moment. Just have a prayer in your heart that the Spirit of the Lord will speak to you, and the Holy Spirit will speak to you. And my words are often sometimes irrelevant in that whole process. But if you have a prayer for what I'm about to say, I have thought long and hard about what to share with you, and I'm not sure how this shakes out, I'll be honest. We start with a profound moment of lament. And lament is actually a very underutilized thing in our practices, I feel, today. Lament is an honest and true kind of shaking the fist at God, at the Elohim. It isn't, well, for me, it translates as showing up as your real self. It's not putting on this face. They know the thoughts of and intents of our heart. There's nothing to be hidden. But sometimes when life gets so intense, or if you feel promises have been made to you and you're just saying, look, I am not seeing these, or I am not being delivered, or I'm getting my trash kicked out here, and where are you? You said you would be with me. Well, the Psalms actually, most of our Psalms are Psalms of lament. And this same thing, you promised me some things and you are not delivering on your promises. Now, I don't know why we don't go into that, or if we feel like it's negative. And honestly, there really are let's just clear the air and say there are no good or bad feelings. And feelings are transient, they come and go. The issue is when the feelings get stuck and they stay with us. But to feel something deeply and profoundly is not a bad thing. And to feel let down is not a bad thing. And as I've been reading and studying the Psalms through this lens of lament, I've come to understand that only those truly in relationship with Jesus Christ, or with our heavenly parents, are those who can truly lament. Joseph Smith is a great example of someone who truly lamented, Lord, where is your hiding place? You said you would help us, and here I am. Those who in true relationship with the Lord are those most able to truly lament. Now, lament always ends with an expression or a reiteration of a belief in God's promises. So it isn't a sustained, everything sucks, the end. It's everything sucks right now. You kind of left me high and dry. I'm totally high and dry, but I will still maintain my faith and belief in you. I will still see this thing through. And I trust that you will remain true to your word. There's there's an expression of faith in God's timing. So for whatever reason, after thinking so much, I feel like I should share this very tragic situation with you and discuss some of the implications that are found in just a few verses of scripture. So to do this, I wanted to go to the account of Alma and Amulek before the chief judge in Ammonihah. Now, just for a little review, Alma the Younger was someone who did not follow the ways of the Lord. His father was Alma, the one who was one of the chief priests of King Noah, and heard Abinadi's testimony, and that is Abinadi's one convert. So, first of all, there's a lesson to you on never look at your work in terms of numbers. Okay, if we want to look at quantity, that's often a very worldly paradigm to look at. Abinadi, if you look at him as a missionary, one convert, well, how many converts did Alma have? And how many converts came from those that Alma taught? An innumerable host by the time you see it through. So, first of all, please know that, and my mission president used to always say, if it's so be that you labor all of your days and bring one soul to me, how great shall be your joy. He's like, if you bring one soul, that soul better be you. Okay, so even if you are in this mess and you get out of this mess with just your own soul, how great shall be your joy with the Lord in the day to come. Well, Alma had a son. He was named Alma the Younger, and he and the sons of Mosiah went about just creating havoc for the church and teaching many to disbelieve. At which point an angel appeared to Alma the Younger and the sons of Helaman. And let me read you that text really quickly. If you want to turn to Mosiah chapter 3, verse 27. Well, he said, if you want to sin and be destroyed, that's totally up to you. It says he shook the earth with a voice of thunder. And this is the concluding warning that if you persist in your evil ways, well, let's back up to verse 25. If they be evil that are consigned to an awful view of their own guilt and abominations, which doth cause them to shrink from the presence of the Lord in a state of misery and endless torment, from whence they can no more return. Therefore, they have drunk damnation to their own souls. And I'm going to skip down to verse 27. Their torment is as a lake of fire and brimstone, whose flames are unquenchable, and whose smoke ascendeth up forever and ever. Thus hath the Lord commanded me. Amen. Well, these are the words of the angel to Alma the Younger. Alma the Younger repents, and then he and the sons of Mosiah seek to go and restore good to some of the bad things they have done. And one of those is in the place of Ammonihah. Now, the reason Ammonihah is so far from the truth, in spite of vigorous practice and in spite of, being devoted, is in part what Alma taught them. So there's this kind of, karma's coming back around the mountain. And in Alma chapter 12, verse 16, after Alma and Amulek have really been exhorting them. Now, Alma went to teach Ammonihah and was thrown out, and he was on his way leaving forever. And an angel stops him and says, no, you've got to go back. You've got to teach. Now, this is all going to play into this story and how easy it is for us to ruminate, how easy it is for us to go back and doubt so many things. The fact is, this angel instructed Alma to go back, and he was met by Amulek. Now, Amulek had an angel visit him and said, a servant of God is coming. I need you to feed him and take care of him. Well, he meets Alma. Alma ministers to he and his family. Many of his family are converted. Amulek's converted. And they go out and they together, as two witnesses, teach the people of Ammonihah. And Amulek's strength is that he's from the city. He's grown up here and everyone's known him. So he wants to add his witness. Well, the witness is not well received, even with all that, in so much that Alma, in chapter 12, verse 16, is trying to explain his own experience with the angel, in that they will partake of a second death. And this is what he says, Alma 12:16. Now behold, I say unto you, then cometh a death, even a second death, which is a spiritual death. Then is a time that whosoever dieth in his sins as to a temporal death shall also die a spiritual death. Yea, he shall die as to things pertaining unto righteousness. Then is the time when their torments shall be as a lake of fire and brimstone, whose flames ascendeth up forever and ever. And that they are in the captivity of Satan. Well, please repent. That's the message. Well, it doesn't go well. And in chapter 14, Alma and Amulek are brought before the chief judge and judged. And all of these lawyers and judges come and say that they've borne false witness. And for this, Zeezrom, who Alma has taken out, says these are just men, and he gets thrown out. So here's how we're ending up in Ammonihah. Zeezrom came to pass, he began to cry unto the people, saying, behold, I am guilty, and these men are spotless before God. And he began to plead with them from that time forth. But they reviled him, saying, art thou also possessed with a devil? And they spit upon him, and they cast him out from among them, and also all those who believed in the words which had been spoken by Alma and Amulek, and sent men to cast stones at them. Well, I actually speak so much about the divine feminine and our Heavenly Mother and the role of women. And I'm trying to share my screen here with you, and I'm not seeing how to do that. Hang on. Share screen. Oh, here we go. So here's our text right here. So the first thing here, though, is that in speaking about women's roles so often, some people want to say, well, what about the men? Well, the male salvific path is far more delineated and fleshed out than the women's, but I do want to make this just critically important point. We don't do this alone. We don't do this alone as women, and men don't do it alone as men. We are either going to rise or fall together. And there's a poignant moment here where you see that the events that transpire are able to happen because the men and women are separated. Right here, after they cast out the men, in verse 8, they brought their wives and children together, and whosoever believed or had been taught to believe in the word of God, they caused that they should be cast into the fire. And they also brought forth their records, which contain the holy scriptures. and cast them into the fire also, that they might be burned and destroyed with the fire. By fire, sorry. I was prompted by the Spirit that catastrophic things often occur when men and women are separated. The Garden of Eden is a great example. The Holocaust is a great example. I'm not sure so many of those atrocities would have had the space to happen if men had been by their women and children. And I wanted to point out that one of the beautiful strengths of men is this built-in heroism that comes forth when women and children, those who, or anyone who's marginalized for that matter, are suffering. And they feel the need to stand up, to fight, to defend them. So let that be a warning to us. The wives and children are bought. The records are destroyed. Everything's destroyed. Verse 9, and it came to pass, they took Alma and Amulek and carried them forth to the place of martyrdom, that they might witness the destruction of those who were consumed by fire. These are diabolical aims. Can you imagine? When Amulek saw the pains of the women and children who were consuming in the fire, he also was pained and said unto Alma, how can we witness this awful scene? Therefore, let us stretch forth our hands and exercise the power of God, which is in us, and save them from the flames. Now remember, Amulek is from this city. He knows who's in the fire. I would even venture to say his family is part of this fire. Imagine. And Alma said to him, the Spirit constraineth me, literally stops me, that I must not stretch forth mine hand. For behold, the Lord receiveth them up unto himself in glory, and he doth suffer that they may do this thing, or that the people may do this thing unto them according to the hardness of their hearts, that the judgments which he shall exercise upon them in his wrath may be just. And the blood of the innocent shall stand as a witness against them, yea, and cry mightily against them in the last day. Now Amulek said unto Alma, behold, perhaps they will burn us also. You know, I'm here with Amulek. I'm like, you know what? Hopefully they throw me in this fire right now, so I don't have to live with this. But Alma said, be it according to the will of the Lord, but behold, our work is not finished. Therefore, they burn us not. And here's the kingpin right here. Now it came to pass when the bodies of those who had been cast into the fire were consumed, and also the records which were cast in with them, the chief judge of the land came and stood before Alma and Amulek as they were bound. So we have taken everything good from you that you love, that you cherish, and we've burned it. There have also got them bound in cords. And he smote them with his hand upon their cheeks. And he said unto them, after what ye have seen, will ye preach again unto this people, that they shall be cast into a lake of fire and brimstone? Behold, ye see that ye had not power to save those who had been cast into the fire. Neither has God saved them, because they were of thy faith. And the judge smote them again upon the cheeks and asked, what say ye for yourselves? And it came to pass that Alma and Amulek answered him nothing. And he smote them again and delivered them to the officers to be cast into prison. Well, here's the rub. and we'll come back to this, but I wanted to read this brilliant, oh, sorry, I need to change my view here. Here we go. This brilliant independent theological introduction by Christy Nielsen Turley. This is probably the most poignant thing I've ever read about scripture. This is from the Maxwell Institute, and I have to read her actual words. She talks about how they've been spit upon, they're bound with strong cords, they're naked, they're deprived of food and water. If you keep reading in that chapter, they're physically abused, they're punched, they're slapped, they're emotionally abused, and they stay silent. They don't make any comments. This is page 87 of her writing. More than physical harm, however, the story focuses on the mocking, distressing words spoken by the chief judge and the many lawyers and judges and priests and teachers. The focus of these details hints that the psychological wounds are more haunting than the physical ones. I should probably pause here and say, I lament that I feel prompted to share this account with you. And if this is triggering, if you have trauma or wounds that are just now, they're festering, whatever it is, please feel free to disengage if this is too much. It's a lot. It's a lot. But there's a reason I'm speaking to wounds, precisely because we bear them. And precisely because I feel prompted that many of you bear deep wounds. So there's a point here. There's something here, but please know that. This is not, well, then the chief judge asks, after what you've seen, will you preach again unto this people? They shall be cast into a lake of fire and brimstone. This is not a random question. It is targeted directly at Alma and aimed to damage him as much as possible. The chief judge probably does not care what metaphor Alma used to preach repentance, except that this metaphor was useful in escalating Alma's pain. The judge's question seems targeted to remind Alma of his prophecy that the torment of the unrepentant shall be as a lake of fire and brimstone, whose flame ascendeth up forever and ever. The judge and the people of Ammonihah guarantee that Alma sees friends die. They guarantee that Amulek, the man an angel promised would be blessed by Alma's presence, is beside Alma, bound with strong cords and brought to the fire while the flames are blazing. Alma and Amulek are forced to witness women and children, most likely including Amulek's family, be burned to death, an agonizing way to die. Still not content, the chief judge ensures that Alma understands the brutal irony at the heart of this horror. Alma's unfortunate gospel metaphor about a lake of fire and brimstone, which is actually the angel's words, which Alma actually experienced and was trying to warn them of, prompts the literal lake of fire and brimstone that burns before his eyes. The violence revolves around words, ideas, and metaphor in ways that are vicious, deliberate, and personal. Though the narrator blames Nehor, the people of Ammonihah have more in common with the unbelievers than with Nehor. Alma came to reclaim these people, but they know who Alma was, and they know how to blame him. Ammonihah's citizens aim to torture Alma in horrifyingly inhumane ways. And the final twist is telling him that his rhetoric, his hallmark skill, is the cause. Events much less dramatic, much less pointed, and much less personal than Ammonihah can haunt someone, even traumatize. When the chief judge asks his question about the lake of fire and brimstone, Alma and Amulek answer him nothing. Silence can be a rational choice, but it can also be a response to shocking trauma. Trauma, the Greek word for wound, occurs when events overwhelm the mind. What a person's eyes saw or ears heard or body felt is recorded in the brain, but the mind is unable to process or integrate the event into a person's understanding of reality. The memories are in someone's brain, but they are scattered and recorded in fragments. The event becomes unspeakable and likely remembered as feeling or emotion or image rather than words or language. The extent of the shock and distress caused by Ammonihah's fires is encapsulated in the fact that this well-used metaphor of hell disappears from Nephite records. The words lake of fire and brimstone are never spoken again by anyone in the Book of Mormon. And she goes on to say that silence is Alma's answer. And then I want to read this from page 93. Silence is Alma's answer. The hatred and vindictiveness bring Alma to a quiet place where time moves without marking, where the narrator cannot explain who is speaking, and where Alma seems to be struggling to speak at all. If Alma did not know before, he does now. Following the command of an angel does not indicate that all will be well. Repenting does not mean that guilt or shame for past sin will not reemerge years later and slap harder than a malicious judge. Obedience does not prevent a community of wicked people from lighting a fire and burning innocence. The lessons are harsh. They tutored Alma into stillness. What he produces is 100% paralyzed and unlike anything he speaks before. And after his silence, you'll notice that after this moment, it clips to Alma meeting the sons of Mosiah from their missionary journeys and then into the missionary journeys, and picks up again with Alma's cry in Alma 29. One of his laments is the wish of his heart to speak with the trump of God, to go forth with a voice to shake the earth, and to cry and declare as with the voice of thunder, repentance. Well, I hate to talk about this, but these are deep wounds. And it doesn't go without saying that after many days, Alma 26, they remain silent. They continue to be beaten. Alma cried, saying, "How long shall we suffer these great afflictions, O Lord? O Lord, give us strength according to our faith, which is in Christ, even unto deliverance." And they broke the cords with which they were bound. The cords that bind us are broken with our pleas. And I know you're talking about Emma Smith and Joseph Smith, but Emma in particular. And I've been thinking about Emma, who had 5 children live out of 11. About Emma, whose husband was beaten imprisoned, taken, chained, starved, poisoned, beat. I think about Emma, whose husband was killed. I think about Emma, who was pregnant with her last child at the time of martyrdom. I think of the many things that Emma endured as a result of being married to Joseph Smith and standing by him. In fact, most portraits we have of Emma show her with one eyelid that's droopy. And some people speculate that that's the cause of a stroke, but the fact is that there's no evidence or proof that she suffered from a stroke. But some believe it may be more something like this, that the trauma, the wounds that she incurred as part of standing as a witness of her husband. This is a woman who also had gloriously sublime moments. She's the first president of the Female Relief Society of Nauvoo. She's told the angels will not be able to be restrained from being their companions. This is someone who goes with Joseph in 1827. Moroni says he won't release the plates until he brings the chosen one, and he's shown Emma, and he brings Emma to the place with him, and he's able to retrieve the plates in 1827. She helps him translate them. She could run her fingers along the metal plates. She's a scribe, and her witness of the Book of Mormon was that Joseph once asked her about going up or down from Jerusalem. He didn't know that that was the geography of that area. And her testimony was that, and I'm paraphrasing, that someone with Joseph's education could never come up with the Book of Mormon. Kylie Turley, incidentally, found out that information about that particular phrase from doing what's called a text criticism. And there are scholars who have gone through the Book of Mormon and looked for speech patterns, words that reoccur, phrases, and all of these speech patterns are unique to Alma. That particular one is never used again. That is a deep wound. And I imagine Emma also carried many deep wounds. To quote her own words from one of her journals, when she crossed the frozen Mississippi in 1839, "No one but God knows the reflections of my mind and the feelings of my heart when I left our house and home, and almost all of everything that we possessed, excepting our little children." So she's also responsible for getting the little children to safety, and took my journey out of the state of Missouri alone, leaving Joseph shut up in that lonesome prison. But the reflection is more than human nature ought to bear. And if God does not record our sufferings and avenge our wrongs on them that are guilty, I shall be sadly mistaken. Well, something in common with Emma, an elect lady, and the prophet Alma and Amulek, is this desire to trust heaven's timing in all of this. It's so easy to want to just take care of it ourselves. And perhaps the greatest test is trusting the Lord with our wounds, with our trauma, with the unspoken things in our heart that we are not even able to articulate, but that live with us. An elect woman is such an interesting phrase. In Hebrew, Bahir is the word, and it means chosen, a choice one that's chosen of God. And that particular word shows up 4 times in the Old Testament. In Isaiah 42:1, "Behold my servant, whom I sustain," or lay hold of. It literally means to grasp hold of, to hold up. mine elect, meaning my chosen or chosen out of, in whom my soul delighteth. I have given my spirit over. Now remember, spirit in Hebrew is a feminine noun. So that's something to consider. In 1 John, 2 John, verse 1, he writes to the elect lady, and electos means, again, one who is chosen out, one who is particular. So, and we have an ordinance called one's calling and election made sure. The first part of that is a calling, the call that you feel to follow your heart, to follow the dictates of your own conscience, has led you to this place. That election, I believe, is something that is bestowed when you follow that calling, when you're true to that calling, in the face of every obstacle and every odd. And I think Emma Smith is such a great example of that. She has a very, very complicated story. I would never do her the disservice of trying to boil it down to a few facts or a few moments. I talk about some highs and some lows, but certainly all relationships are complicated, and hers was complicated in ways that are unimaginable to many of us. What it cost her to be the wife of Joseph Smith and what she gained by being the wife of Joseph Smith tell me that there's something extraordinary in her makeup and in her character, but that she also bears these wounds. She has the visible effects of her wounds in her portraits as well. Her final letter to Joseph, and I believe he instructed her to write the blessing she would have him give her, and he would sign it. These are some of her final words while he's living. I desire the Spirit of God to know and understand myself, that I might be able to overcome whatever of tradition or nature that would not tend to my exaltation in the eternal worlds. What an amazing focus, knowing like what's ever here on earth is not what's there in heaven. I desire a fruitful, active mind that I may be able to comprehend. To comprehend means to take into oneself. It's not just to understand, but to actually take it in. The designs of God when revealed through his servants without doubting. She's really just an extraordinary woman. This is what Joseph Smith wrote about her: with what unspeakable delight and what transports of joy swelled my bosom when I took by the hand on that night my beloved Emma, she that was my wife, even the wife of my youth and the choice of my heart. Again, she is here, even in the seventh trouble, undaunted, firm, and unwavering, unchangeable, affectionate Emma. While the seventh is the culmination, the completion of waves, and her husband's commentary on her that she was undaunted, firm, and unwavering. Well, I guess my point is this, that we all bear wounds from our experiences here on earth. And the book of Revelation teaches us that we will have our tears dried, that we will be healed of these wounds. But I can't help but think about the Savior, and that when the sacrament is taken on the Sabbath, we are asked to remember him at his most broken, at his most wounded. And to partake of that with him, to be part of that moment with him. And even as he's a resurrected, perfect being, complete being, perfect means complete or whole, the wounds remain. In fact, that's how we recognize him, is that we feel the wounds, we touch the wounds. And those wounds are the marks that he bears for us, of the witness of his love that he bears for us. And I think of the wounds that Emma and so many other women, you bear for Jesus Christ. And on behalf of others, perhaps you also have some of these very grievous wounds. And yet those wounds, there's something to them, I guess. You can have them. And Alma took 5 years of silence to process. And Amulek, I don't even know. I guess the point I'm saying is we carry these wounds, but we can use them to define us negatively or use them as a way to come closer together. If I were to come in front of you and give you some ridiculous biography about blah, 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 and this and that and blah, 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 how close do you feel to me? Probably not very close. But if I came to you at this moment and said, my wound right now is I just had my youngest who left on a mission and I miss her terribly. And those first months of missionary service are intense, and having a front row seat to her suffering is the last thing I like to do. That is not my jam. And yet it's her decision and it's her choice, and I trust that it leads to beautiful things. And I trust that woundedness opens us up to each other, to life's experiences, to ways we can nurture and sit with each other and identify with each other. Those wounds are ways that we can recognize each other. We can come through the crowds and sit together with that pain. Said that Alma brought Amulek into his home and ministered to him. I can't imagine what that entailed for both of them. And I can't imagine what this event entails for all of you, or what Emma's trials and Joseph's trials were for them. But I do know that the person that I love and emulate bears his wounds and shares them with me and asks me to remember them, and is a way that he and I are able to commiserate over this thing called life. And cursed as I am, I have a blessing and a cursing that I just will see beauty in everything. And it's a blessing, but in moments like this, it's kind of a cursing. But there's something uniquely beautiful and graceful and godlike and so like our Heavenly Mother, women who can bear wounds, who can sit with wounds, who can tend wounds, who can acknowledge wounds. And I pray that whatever it is, I admit I have no idea why I'm prompted to share this story with you. Perhaps there are things that have come out or will come out. I have no idea. I'm totally trusting the Spirit. And if this is a complete and utter flop, then it's a complete and utter flop. I apologize for taking your time. I'm going to have to trust the Spirit on this one, because this is not a message that I relish giving or take joy in giving. So as my final word, as a way to bind up the broken heart, I found this practice of being still, of meditating, and repeating something. It's called Lectio Divina, repeating this godly word that that perhaps you can find a small dressing or a small bit of balm for the wounds that you carry, and know that they're beautiful. This particular meditation is about perhaps wounds or burdens that particularly we as women carry that are needless and are unnecessary. And if you feel prompted, perhaps this is a great way for you to lament these wounds, to weep, to mourn together, to share, and then to find a way to set them down, to let them go. They're part of you, but to not carry the horror, the terror, the weight that comes with them. So if possible, I would love for facilitators, if it's possible, to dim the lights. If not, just close your eyes. You can sit with your feet planted on the ground, get some good grounding in there. Your hands can be receptive or on the ground. You can be laying down, whatever is comfortable for you. Just take a couple of minutes and get really comfortable wherever you're at. If you need to get a drink or, settle in. And then I want you to close your eyes. And I want us all to take a really big, deep breath together. Inhale through the nose. Exhale through the mouth. Let's do that a couple more times. Giant breaths. Inhale. Exhale. Keep taking big, deep breaths. The breath of life is something sacred. It says the Spirit of God hovered over the waters. Our Heavenly Mother hovered over creation as if incubating it. That breath of life means something, and that breath is a way to connect to what you're feeling in your body, a way to process, to feel, to take in goodness of God, and to release some of the wound. And take in and release. And while you do that, I'd like to read this with you. I will repeat it 3 times. It's called Come Away. And it comes from the scripture, Mark 6:31. He said to them, "Come away to a deserted place, but all by yourselves, and rest a while." Come away. The world will turn without you. Let go of the have to, the should, the ought. Notice what you set down, the weight of expectations, the feeling of proving yourself to yourself. Notice how you feel. Unburdened, at peace, anxious, free, afraid, waiting for the gavel to drop. Notice, what if it's okay? It's okay. Practice this Sabbath exercise, this holy desertion, so you may take it with you into the crowd. You honor what is in your hands only if you hold it lightly. Come away to the place of solitude. where you already are waiting for you. This second time I read it, I want you to pick out a particular word or phrase that maybe sticks out to you. Come away. The world will turn without you. Let go of the have to, the should, the ought. Notice what you set down, the weight of expectations, the feeling of proving yourself to yourself. Notice how you feel unburdened, at peace, anxious, free, afraid, waiting for the gavel to drop. Notice, what if it's okay? It's okay. Practice this Sabbath exercise, this holy desertion, so that you may take it with you into the crowd. You honor what is in your hands only if you hold it lightly. Come away to the place of solitude where you already are waiting for you. And this last time, I just want you to rest. Just rest. Relish this rest. Come away. The world will turn without you. Let go of the have to, the should, the ought. Notice what you set down. The weight of expectations. The feeling of proving yourself to yourself. Notice how you feel unburdened, at peace, anxious, free, afraid, waiting for the gavel to drop. Notice, what if it's okay? It's okay. Practice this Sabbath exercise, this holy desertion, so that you may take it with you into the crowd. You honor what is in your hands only if you hold it lightly. Come away to the place of solitude where you already are waiting for you. Take a few moments. Be with yourself. Record what's in your heart, just in your heart. You don't have to hold it tightly. You don't have to hold it to you. Let the Spirit hold it with you. And just breathe. Just breathe. And when you're ready, you can slowly open your eyes. Come back to earth. I'm sorry you have to. This mortal coil, as Hamlet says. Please know that you never travel this alone. If you can come away to the place where you're waiting for you, there's a part of you that is far more advanced than this celestial body remembers. There's a goddess and a priestess and a queen in you that knows these things. And the invitation is to come away, to remember who you are and whose you are. As a daughter of our Heavenly Mother, you have a birthright. And that birthright is that you have the power and the ability and the capability to fulfill the calling you've agreed to do upon this earth. And that you will be met in your time of trouble, that your laments are heard, your wounds are noted, and your cry for deliverance is on the docket. And if you have been delivered, you probably we all still carry some of those wounds. And as the Doctrine and Covenants teaches us, the Son of Man hath descended below them all. Art thou greater than he? The whole reason he went into hell was for you and I. And he will sit with you in there as long as you need him to. May you be blessed in your associations with each other. May we be more tender to each other's wounds, and may we be more vulnerable and open to sharing those and finding ways to pour out our soul to the needy, to the poor in spirit, as well as those who are lacking the necessities of life. The fact that you're here tells me something about the kind of woman you are, and that you feel heaven's call and you feel these things deeply. And my prayer is that this time together will give you balm and dressing. And if you have healing and have been healed, that you can be balm and dressing to others. But our wounds can actually be beautiful things. They can be the parts where as Rumi says, the wound is where the light enters in. And perhaps the way we frame these are ways that can be blessed and bring us closer as the Lord did. And I say that in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
So what I've put on your tables, you should have 3 little things that go along with my talk. One of them is Emma's Hope. The other one is Beginning Believers Help List. And the other one is just Start and Embrace Grace support group. So with the Emma's Hope one, if you cannot take that one, because we're going to be putting that in our service project boxes, but it's for you to just look through for now. So I only have 90 of them. But these Beginning Believers Help List, you can take as many as you like if you want to use them for your own thing. So my presentation today I've titled it Emma's Hope. And it goes along with the pamphlet that you have there titled the same. Some individuals actually chose not to attend today because of the misconceptions about the nature of the topic that I intended to address. And what is there to fear? There's nothing to fear, and I would have loved for them to have asked. So I apologize for any misconception on my part. This gathering was initially my own offering to put together, a labour of love of 12 years of this feeling just pressing into my heart. But it wouldn't have come about had not dear sisters and brothers come on board to support, present and participate. The lesson learned is maybe I ought to more have clearly expressed my intentions. Nevertheless, I appreciate the words of encouragement and also the well-intended cautions that I've received. I understand that some feel uncomfortable discussing this topic, while others have strong political views and can teach true points of Scripture to emphasize God's ire. While I do not disagree or take on these debates, I observe that everyone is familiar with the topic of abortion and the biblical viewpoint. Besides those who have been inspired to address this topic, few have had a clear course of action beyond distant judgment or avoidance. But because of the many viewpoints and experiences, it tells me that everyone cares deeply. To my knowledge, within the circles that I engage with, there has been no mention of beginning a healing ministry, extending goodwill, initiating unbiased dialogue, bridging understanding, walking in healing, supporting, loving and comforting all those impacted by abortion. This is a complex issue that carries deep emotional layers affecting men, women and our communities. Many individuals are burdened by passionate beliefs and the trauma associated with abortion, compounded by misunderstandings and harsh judgments, anger, grief, loss, regret, lack of support. Although it might seem simpler to pass judgment or label others without our movement or church, outside our movement or church, reflecting on the past 184 years reveals that Mormonism has not been immune to such issues within our own history. It is worth noting that there is credible evidence suggesting that John C. Bennett, operating under Dr. John Bennett, conducted numerous abortions in Nauvoo. So here we're just going to take a very brief historic detour because I feel it's necessary for our discussion today. Oh, it's hot in here. John C. Bennett entered Nauvoo in September 1840 and he boarded with the Smiths for the next 39 weeks. During this time, Joseph and Bennett seemed to share an amiable relationship, with Bennett eventually being named assistant president of the church, general of the Nauvoo Legion and Nauvoo mayor. This friendship did not last long, however. Within months of his arrival, Joseph learned that Bennett had been previously involved in a pattern of immoral activity. He continued his escapades and was confronted. He promptly confessed his sins and Joseph forgave him upon resolution to improve. However, Bennett did not change, and by the spring of 1842, the friendship between the two was irreparable. Bennett was excommunicated and left town in June, never to return. He did, however, not quietly exit Nauvoo, instead turning his unbridled wrath upon the prophet. First, he published a series of articles in a newspaper accusing Joseph of immorality, later compiling those into a book entitled The History of the Saints. Months later, he would write, quote, "He," referring to Joseph Smith, "has awakened the wrong passenger and must suffer," close quote. Although a well-documented philanderer, John C. Bennett did not leave behind a trail of pregnancies and illegitimate children. He was a trained obstetrician, however I pronounce that word, apologies, and presumably would have had the knowledge on how to abort a pregnancy. And there are in fact 3 historical documents that associate Bennett with abortion. Hiram Smith testified in 1842 that Bennett assuaged the fears of the women he seduced by promising he would, quote, "give them medicine to provide abortions, providing they should become pregnant," close quote. Mrs. Z. Goddard confirmed on August 28, 1842, quote, "Mrs. Pratt stated to me that Dr. John Bennett told her he could cause abortion with perfect safety to the mother at any stage of pregnancy, and that he had frequently destroyed and removed infants before their time to prevent exposure of the parties, and that he had instruments for that purpose. Sarah Pratt described the instrument Bennett may have used as a pretty long instrument, a kind that I'd never seen before. It seemed to be of steel and was crooked at one end. These statements document that Bennett claimed he was capable of inducing via medications or performing with surgical instrumentation and abortion. As a licensed physician and experienced obstetrician, he may have done so in Nauvoo. In 1825, John C. Bennett passed the exam then required to practice medicine. He published the Accoucheur Vad Mecum, an account of his obstetrical experience. Sarah Pratt also claimed in the 1880s in relation to Bennett, quote, abortion was practiced on a large scale in Nauvoo. Dr. John C. Bennett, the evil genius, brought this abomination into a scientific system. He showed my husband and me the instruments with which he used. There was a house in Nauvoo, right across the flat, around a mile and a half from the town, a kind of hospital, and they sent women there when they showed signs of celestial consequences. Abortion was practiced regularly in this house. For those who may think Joseph Smith had a part in Bennett's lies and conduct, or that Sarah Pratt was just an apostate and that her words carry no weight, I refer you to the plural marriage talk given in 2015 by Denver Snuffer in part reading. Before Sarah Pratt left the church and became an enemy of plural marriage, she spoke with Joseph Smith III, who asked her about Joseph, his father. He obviously knew about what John Bennett had written about his father and Sarah. Therefore, he asked her to tell him the truth about these events. Sarah answered his questions, and it was after she died when her answer was published in the Saints' Herald, a newspaper printed by the Reorganized Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Below is the account that they published. Joseph Smith III. Did he ever at such time or in any other time or place make improper overtures to you or proposals of an improper nature, and begging your pardon for the apparent indelicacy of this question? To this, Mrs. Pratt replied quietly but firmly, no. Joseph, your father, never said an improper word to me in his life. He knew better. Sister Pratt, it has been frequently told that he behaved improperly in your presence, and I have been told that I dare not come to you and ask about you or your relations with him for fear that you would tell me things which would be unwelcome to me. She replied, you needn't have such fear. She repeated, your father was never guilty of an action or proposal with improper nature in my house, toward me, or in my presence, or at any time or place. There is no truth in the reports that have been circulated about him in this regard. He was always the Christian gentleman and a noble man. I was impressed to discuss this particular topic at a Remembering Emma gathering, the reason being that this and other significant issues was the battle Emma was fighting before her husband's tragic and conspired murder. Beyond Bennett's hidden abortions, there were false accusations of polygamy against her husband, various forms of terrible abuse, including sexual, rape, manipulative behaviours of the men levelled at the vulnerable women, and many undisclosed and immoral practices. On top of that, Joseph Smith had to deal with, quote, aspiring men, great big elders, as he'd call them, who had caused him so much trouble. These circumstances led Emma, with Joseph's editorial assistance, to pen a poignant letter condemning the actions of the people engaged in such wickedness, violence and deceit. who ought to know better. Known as the voice of innocence, her letter was a sharp rebuke and a call for repentance, marking a significant moment in the history when women spoke authoritatively. Despite the disdain it received, the letter forthrightly exposed the men's hidden misconduct, which led to a further revolt against Joseph and particular mob violence towards Emma, and I believe further culminating in Joseph's tragic death. Following Joseph's murder, Brigham Young assumed leadership and disbanded the Relief Society, disregarding women's independent authority. This decision halted the Society's duties and charitable activities. Brigham Young imposed his assumed authority and prevented Emma Smith from leading the female church members to gather and attend to their official Relief Society business. Brigham and his supporters turned most hearts cold toward the now widowed and grieving Emma. The controversy of the women's right to hold men accountable for their behaviours eroded the leaders' trust in the Relief Society. And this quote I'm going to read I had never heard it before. It is so telling. John Taylor criticised Emma for opposing Joseph's teachings on plural marriage in the lead up to the Society's dissolution. And this is the quote. John Taylor said, "Sister Emma made use of the position she held to try to pervert the minds of the sisters and taught the sisters that the principle of celestial marriage or plural marriage, as taught and practiced by Joseph Smith the prophet, was not of God." This, Taylor later commented, was the reason why the Relief Society did not continue. 10 years later, and 1,300 miles from Nauvoo, now established in the Rocky Mountains, Brigham Young reinstated the Relief Society, but now bringing it all under his supervision, which notably limited any authority and responsibilities women once held. All the privileges, rights, authority, and ministering previously granted to women through Joseph and Emma, enabling the society to operate independently, were now consolidated under the male priesthood. So we have a problem. Since 1845, there hasn't been a female relief society following the divine pattern Joseph and Emma established, with all its accompanying rights, privileges, benefits, blessings, gifts of the priesthood, as well as signs following the faith of a united sisterhood. Good things have been done for sure, but a prophecy remains unfulfilled, awaiting covenant-keeping women and all others willing to assist, to hold up and advance toward the original Holy Order foundation, labouring together with the assistance of wisdom's divine guidance. And back to the topic today. From the likes of John C. Bennett in Mormon history to historical accounts of the Roman Catholic Church permitting abortion of male fetuses within 40 days and female fetuses within 90 days, along with the torture and burning of pregnant women, the history of abortion is deeply unsettling. This history is a part of all our collective ancestry. This topic is less political, but rather a body of Christ issue with the opportunity to minister. Acknowledging to the heavens that abortion has touched all of our past in some way, we have an opportunity to repent of the sins of our fathers and to turn and face Christ and be busily engaged in a wise and compassionate repair of the breach. But it seems to me that today we tend to pass judgments with biased labels because we often forget our shared history. Consequently, we might view anyone who does not align with our morals, spiritual, or religious views as adversaries when their life choices conflict with our current beliefs. I observe that when some people believe they understand the truth, they tend to grasp onto a partial concept like a scroll and run with it enthusiastically and proclaim it loudly, driven by their passion. And I've had that zeal too at times. However, our enthusiasm with limited knowledge, without wisdom, without compassion and charity being the most of all, without her, can lead us to become overbearing and even harmful. Paul reminds us, though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels and have not charity, I have become as a sounding brass or a tinkling cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, though I have all faith and so that I could move mountains and have not charity, I am nothing. And although I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned and have not charity, it profits me nothing. Charity suffers long and is kind. Charity envies not. Charity vaunts not itself, is not puffed up, does not behave itself unseemingly, seeks not her own, is not easily provoked, thinks no evil, rejoices not in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, and endures all things. Charity never fails. Most women and men face diverse and intense struggles when considering abortion as an option. As we make effort to comprehend their internal battles and truly listen and seek to understand the circular perspective, it may be easier to support these individuals onto a Christ-centered path of healing and provide the encouragement and support they need to keep their baby. Each of our life experiences and perspectives are profound due to the challenges we have each faced. Traumas and decisions others grapple with may be more significant than we can imagine. We often admire the strength and bravery of our spiritual role models, yet we tend to criticize and condemn those whose inner fortitude goes unnoticed because others are too preoccupied with dismissing or degrading them as insignificant. And the pattern must stop with us. Among us are many broken spirits, individuals discouraged by misguided judgments. This is why in the covenant the Lord instructed us to pursue judgment. Another layer of interpreting the meaning could be seeing things accurately through His understanding and compassionate eyes. Perhaps we have overlooked and neglected those whom the Lord cherishes the most. It is in walking the road with a fellow traveller along the dusty road to Emmaus meaning the healing hot springs where the Lord reveals Himself, that I have felt His presence and love and received answers to my prayers. By attentively listening, validating, and conversing with broken hearts with heavy loads, no preaching or lecturing has been necessary as we naturally engage in meaningful heart-connected discussions and gravitationally align with Christ's teachings and see His fingerprint in our individual lives. The people who religious communities often look down upon were the ones whom our Lord associated with, dined with, allowed to touch Him during His ministry. If you seek to encounter the Lord, it is by labouring in the hottest part of the day, in the dust and the dirt with heavy loads and painful wounds. And here you will discover Him, and not only Him, but her as well. And it's not easy. It will challenge you and at times frustrate you. But through walking with another, who is suffering even from the consequences of their own choices, you will come to comprehend the divine characteristics and attributes of God that cannot be found in studying Scripture alone. And that is the secret. Abortion is a pain point in the church. Pain is the calling to attend something. To attend is to hear the cry of people as the body of Christ. And Christ says, "Come unto me and be nourished by the word of God. Become the people of God. Be filled with the Spirit of God." If we were to focus our communities of Zion towards individuals grappling with heartbreak from issues such as abortion and other challenges, those who mourn due to heavy burdens but feel excluded from the movement or churches, if together we were to turn to Christ for solace, we would greatly benefit from their presence and wealth of experiences. There is always room in the community and use in the community for the least of these. However, our community is lacking because of their absence, and we miss out on learning about their dilemmas and struggles, in turn diminishing our own growth. All these factors prompted me to share this talk from my heart. His ways are above our ways. He values those we consider the least among us more than we do. The body of Christ hurts, and we all feel it. We all know it's hurting, but we don't know where or how to attend it. Realistically, there are more women and teenage girls considering abortion than we may realise. Some of them are our daughters and sisters. Others are women who are part of our circles, our friends, potentially young women babysitting our children or teammates on your teenager's sports team, maybe even colleagues working alongside us, married or unmarried. Unexpected circumstances leading to unplanned pregnancies occur in various ways, so it's crucial to not generalise someone's experience. There is no one-size-fits-all approach. We must be cautious, compassionate, and respectful in our understanding and responses. The next segment of my presentation, I kindly request that you set aside any political arguments, passionate feelings, along with your personal opinions for now, even though they are significant and valuable. Would you simply be open and create a space for this moment? This is an offering to learn and become better equipped to serve God's children in a more personal way, through meeting people where they are at, through the language of empathy and love, in a way of mothering and fathering rather than only preaching and holding up signs. Many are already burdened with such guilt and shame. They have no hope or vision of a healed identity in Christ, where through a broken heart and a contrite spirit, the chains of sin can fall off, forgiven and set free. And don't we all need that? I will now introduce a new term rather than using the word abortion: reproductive loss. Reproductive loss is a comprehensive concept that encourages more than just abortion. It also includes after-abortion care, reproductive trauma, miscarriage, stillbirth, infant and child mortality, adoption grief, infertility, barrenness, hysterectomy, the loss of parenthood or grandparenthood, and other related experiences. These not only impact the individuals directly, both female and male, but also the communities surrounding them. Emma Smith herself experienced firsthand many of these traumatic and challenging situations, including most likely mob sexual violence. And she bore her own wounds deep. And though she bore her own deep wounds, she continually offered support and care to others going through similar trials. The grief in all of these things I mentioned in reproductive losses is the same grief that women feel that have gone through abortion at some point in their lives. The proposal I'm sharing with you all today is an invitation to join me in pursuing an idea that has been resonating deep within me. Let's start building upon the foundation Emma left us, a steady ground of charity, revelation, wisdom, gifts of the Spirit, long-suffering, and administering relief to the poor, heavy-burdened, and oppressed. Let's work together to establish a safe and healing environment for ourselves and those we care about who have experienced or are currently facing all the various forms of reproductive loss. And I extend an invitation to individuals across all generations. The wealth of wisdom accumulated by older members defined you as invaluable and nurturing parental figures, so essential to the spiritual well-being of the body of Christ. Equally, our younger generations hold a crucial role. Their adeptness in communication methods such as emails and letters, social media, FaceTime and Zoom, and the nuances of various circles and minority groups is indispensable. And I eagerly anticipate learning from your unique gifts and insights and innovative approaches to community outreach. The desire is to establish a secure and trustworthy space where you can bring your friends and associates for Christ-centered love and support. It is evident that labouring with one another and walking in equality is vital. Everyone is needed and everyone has a specific part to play. Among us, it is likely numerous people have had personal experiences with the losses I have referenced thus far, and I've been honoured to hear some of these sacred and personal stories. I'm going to tell you a story of a megachurch in another state where they were sent some pamphlets as an outreach to invite them into collaborating to share ideas, what they do in their churches to help women and families that have gone through abortion or other forms of reproductive loss. And this is a pastor over several thousand women. And so she sent back the pamphlets with a note on it saying, we have none of these issues. No, thank God we have none of these issues in our congregation. And I just thought that that was extremely out of touch because we don't talk about this and people don't have a place to go. And in that mega church, that's great, they have so many people, but it's still missing the heart connection. The Lord in His mercy has guided us, lifted us incrementally and blessed us abundantly with the covenant of Christ's scriptures. We may now have the opportunity to reach out to a whole new group of people in our missionary efforts, expanding our connections beyond what was previously possible. The movement, or Christian followers, ought to embody the concept of a shining city on a hill, inviting others to take refuge in our shared gospel view and understanding, where they can confess their struggles and heartache and be embraced as a precious child of God and given the space to grieve the things of mortality, to work out their weakness and to be taught and receive valid ordinances, to be supported in the process of healing, and then in turn, when they are ready, teach others to walk the same path. The concept I called Emma's Hope, which you all have the pamphlet there, acknowledges and draws inspiration from Emma Smith and aims to revive a women-led ministry specifically for all those forms of reproductive loss without anyone necessarily knowing its origins. The idea is to provide a platform for private community spiritual support first among this people, fostering personal healing and empathy, practical assistance as required. Emma's Hope invites individuals who have encountered reproductive loss and desire to move forward in healing, and those who seek to understand and participate in the support journey, establishing essential networks and coordinating women's storehouses are pivotal steps as we rely on communal support, Acknowledging the collaborative effort and sacrifice of many hands and hearts is needed to address these challenges effectively and to minister with the most grace and dignity that can be afforded. So Emma's Hope, that pamphlet you have there, goes hand in hand with the beginning believers, help list. And it's an invitation for women and men, but this one's predominantly for women, if they find themselves pregnant and they are considering abortion and they don't have options, they don't feel safe going to people, you could hand them the pamphlet and immediately they will be put into connection with someone who will be there to talk with them, to support them, most preferably a one-on-one visit in person. And it's an invitation that if they give it time and join a Zoom meeting, one day a week for 12 weeks, and we go through, not essentially going to use these, but these are ideas. Like this book is Forgiven and Set Free. It's a 12-week course, but we can adapt it to the restoration. There's another one, Healing a Father's Heart. That's another course that I would advise men only to do. And there are a lot of men who are now fathers that when they were younger and we all did silly stuff, they may have persuaded their girlfriend to get an abortion. And they carry that grief, they carry that guilt and shame like right now today in their families, and they self-loathe and they're not performing the best that they can, that they want to for their families. So anyway, this, Healing the Father's Heart, Brian, you might be good at leading something like that, really dives deep into that grief and trauma that men hold. But the Forgiven and Set Free is more so for women that have gone through abortion, and the grief that's coming up, women can walk with them and labour with them through that. But the 12-week program, Zoom meeting invitations, whatever we want to call it, will be restoration-based. The idea behind the service boxes that we have all here is it's an outreach. If there's anyone in you can take them back to your communities actually, and then keep a hold of them. And if you know of someone that's going through any form of reproductive loss, they have the pamphlet, they have the Believer's Guide, plus they have just little tokens of love and friendship, and you can give it to them. They can reach out to the details on there and on the pamphlet, and then they'll be put into, they'll be able to get access to support. This is only an idea. I feel like I just need to start from somewhere, and by starting from somewhere, it might just give others an idea to really improve it and build upon it and come up with something different. But I know within some of the circles we walk and the communities we fellowship with, there is nothing. And if someone says, hey, I'm pregnant, I don't know what to do, I'm considering abortion because it's a bit easier, I can't afford it, we really need to circle these people. We can lift each other through life's challenges by genuinely growing these connections. Helping others with their burdens requires understanding what they're going through. This involves being patient, attentive, friendly, and trustworthy enough to uncover and share the weight they carry, and this is to bear one another's burdens, no matter how long it takes. Through not seeing each other through labels, a person's past and their sins, mistakes is not who they are. Christ views us in the eternal perspective of who we will become when we finally allow him to take the reins. We come from love, we are love, and so this is our true colours. In our society, we mostly rely on secular books or defer to the psychological community to inform us through healing or grief or struggle and mental wellness. These cannot substitute for Christ, though we can benefit somewhat through their different practices and understandings. In our culture, it is accepted that the burden of grief and loss is done privately, in isolation, as it is not socially accepted. Most people don't know what to say to the one suffering. So much goes unspoken, and this is called disenfranchised grief. Gospel of Christ speaking, no grief or loss is disenfranchised. It is enfranchised, or hopefully. People are free to acknowledge their grief and losses openly, to mourn publicly and receive support from others and not be judged as dark or playing victim, or they brought it upon themselves, or they're listening to evil spirits. The language of lamentations, which I was amazed Mandy brought that up because I didn't know she was going to say that. The language of lamentations, passages in the Book of Mormon where Nephi or Alma are pouring out their souls in anguish. Sarah's pleadings and emotional intercession in the Book of Jasher, or Esther and Mordecai. Mordecai mourned when he found out about the king's orders. He ripped his clothes, put on sackcloth and wiped ash onto his body. Then he went through the city weeping loudly and in anguish, a public display. But when he came to the king's gate, not far from the palace or the holy place, he stopped, since wearing those sackcloth were not permitted, since those wearing sackcloth were not permitted to enter it and disrupt the mood of the court. That kind of sounds like, we don't want those people here. Insert any minority or religious group you think of. We don't want people in unclean garments. We don't want those looking or thinking or behaving different. We don't feel comfortable around them. They must be bad. They will make our group unclean. They're ruining our mojo. The Book of Mormon, Covenant of Christ, contains a model for walking through hard-to-bear things together as a community. It is contained in the King Benjamin chapters and elsewhere. In Christ's Gospel, we cry unto the Father who hears and listens. We have a fellow sufferer of all our pains who is Christ. We have the Holy Spirit or mind of God through which we receive succor and comfort. And we have, or we should have, a community of believers who acknowledge our grief and suffering and walk with us all the way to Emmaus. We are meant for community, and community is a reflection of heaven. That is what it is to be a body of Christ, walking with each other as we navigate the challenges of mortality. This journey is difficult and brutal at times and lonely, even for those we may admire. Stepping into their shoes would reveal a magnitude of burdens they carry, and I doubt we would want to exchange ours for theirs. But through fellowship, we can begin to share each other's loads, encourage connection, plant trust, grow friendship, and kindly affection, even before fully understanding the depths of the challenges we each carry. I think this is the process of becoming harmless to one another. This mutual support is a blessing and an essential aspect of worshipping together. By aiding one another, we experience a deeper connection to Christ and each other, learning how to worship God as a community and finding unity. While it may be challenging to achieve this across distances, it remains possible and can be done and is being done. My testimony to you individually is that Christ forgives your sins, and through the atonement and knowledge releases you from the guilt associated with them. Through the painful experiences you have been through, the Lord can bring about positive outcomes and mend the hole in your heart and weave your life back together again in a more beautiful tapestry than had you never been broken. The healing process is in His hands and in His timing. You cannot rush your healing and get it done. The sorrows of death encompassed me, and the floods of ungodly men made me afraid. The sorrows of hell encompassed me about. The snares of death confronted me. In my distress I called upon the Lord and cried unto my God. He heard my voice out of His temple, and my cry came before Him even into His ears. God's abundant grace and succor is always available to you. The trauma and trials serves as your initiation into the Christed path. I empathize deeply and hold compassion for everything you have and are going through and the challenges that you are facing. Embrace the difficulties and appreciate the journey you have traveled, as it has granted you wisdom akin to Christ's. The sacrifices you have made have not been in vain. Recognize the difficulty of your journey and appreciate the growth you have made. Your wisdom, combined with Christ's support, plays a vital role in the community of the believers. And finally, this quote: Christ's suffering gave Him perfect understanding of the human experience. He gained knowledge about the human condition from His mortal privations, sufferings, persecutions, rejections, and martyr's death. It was educational, it informed Him. He now possesses a body of knowledge which allows Him to see into our fears, disappointments, frustrations, anxieties, and doubts. In a word, He relates to us. He has felt the bitterness of hatred and rejection. There is no pain you will encounter which He has not already experienced, because He, and I'll add she, relates to our human frailty. He has the capacity to provide us the critical advice, inspiration, counsel, and encouragement to endure. He offers each of us succor to make it through our greatest trials. We often think of our future triumphs over death as Christ's greatest accomplishment in our behalf, and maybe it is in one respect. However, it is His present succor, His present intervention with our human suffering, which is most important at present. Our future condition in the resurrection depends on how much of His succor we are willing to accept at present. And that's from a book called 18 Verses. We are the body, we need each other, we cannot do this work alone. May God be honoured in all we do in His name, and may His people be blessed. And I leave this with you, for you to discern any truth. In the name of Jehovah Shalom, amen. Thanks.
Thank you, Eva. I actually didn't know exactly what you were going to speak about. And since I'm the first one up here after you, I have to respond. On a clinical level, in the obstetric world, which you pronounce just fine, we don't use the word miscarriage, we use the word abortion. There's spontaneous abortions, and there's therapeutic abortions. But that word is still used on every woman's chart, however many losses she had, and it's kind of offensive in a way, like it pricks at my heart, but it's also, it is what it is. It's a life that was aborted for whatever reason, intentional or unintentional. And as you pointed out, loss is suffered at some point in time, either immediate or later, or for the rest of your life. And I'm so glad you went first, because that leads into where I'm going with all this. And I'm going to ask for volunteers in case you were getting sleepy like I am, because I only got 3 hours last night. I know, Michelle, it's my turn. And I'm like, this is so that my filter won't work. And it's scary because it's going to be recorded and put out there. But, so anyway, I'm going to ask for some volunteers. But first, I'm going to start with a song that I want to sing to Emma today. My presentation is about honoring Emma and her lost babies. And she not only lost some of her babies, she also lost adult children. And some of you here, perhaps, and certainly I know listening, have experienced the grief of losing your children before you pass, and it's horribly unfair and challenging. Can you guys hear me okay? I don't want to be too loud. Okay. And this feels really weird. So I'm going to start with this song for her. So it's kind of a heavy day today on every topic, but you know what? That's because we're, that's because for me, this is kind of like having a funeral or a memorial service. We're talking about loss in Emma's life, and I feel personally like there's tremendous meaning to us taking some time to publicly today recognize and honor her losses. And I'd like your guys' help to do that. And I'm hoping that that by doing this for Emma, we can begin to see how to do it for ourselves. Just pray the Spirit leads me, okay? There's a lot of things I could say. I have a sister in my life, dear to me, who has had an experience I'd really like to share. She felt for a while like there was someone missing in their family, a daughter that hadn't been born yet, and she kept having sons. You know, that's a familiar story, right? And so their family was really excited. They're like, we're going to have another baby, and then that ended in a tragic miscarriage. And she was getting older, like me, and feeling like, I'm not sure I want to do this again. And then she remembered she had had a dream after her third child that she saw her children who'd been born up until that point in some sort of vision. And so she had 3 children there, but there was this 4th child there. There was this little girl who was at the head of the children. They were all in birth order. And it wasn't until this last miscarriage that she pondered, that she was struck with the realization that her first pregnancy, which was a loss, hadn't been honored, and that maybe that's who was missing. And so they took the time to name that daughter. And after that, she felt this peace. They didn't need to keep trying to have another baby because they'd already had her. And now she had a name. So I don't know, that that's going to be true for everybody. Everyone's experience is individual, and we have to follow the direction the Lord gives us about our experiences. But I wanted to share that just to introduce the idea that if you've had a loss that's not named, that you might take some time to ponder on how you might honor that. And we don't talk about these losses very often. It's uncomfortable in our society, I guess. I understand why we don't want to talk about abortion, and yet we don't talk about stillbirth either. We just kind of brush it under the rug, and it's uncomfortable. And I'll be the first one to admit that I have had no idea what to say to someone in that situation in the past. It's really scary to say the wrong thing at such a tender, vulnerable time. So I'm really grateful to have found some resources, because in my work as a midwife, I encounter that from time to time. And I found someone local who does this ministry called One Moment. It's specific to the western side of Colorado, but I encourage all of you to take some of her flyers over there. They're here for you to take. And if you go to her website or send someone you know to her website or link to it from whatever social media you have, it will have national resources for anyone who is experiencing any kind of loss. And so that includes women who find out that their baby's not going to make it and they need to decide what to do. As a midwife who does home birth, this is a question that comes up. Do I have to go to the hospital? Can I do this at home? And that's going to vary from situation to situation. And I was really impressed that those resources are there for a woman to be able to go make an informed choice from a loving and Christian perspective and not have to just treat the whole thing like it's a medical event, because it's not, although it can turn into one. So please take advantage of that. In the service project I've worked to get together today is to make little bereavement gowns that we will give to this nonprofit, which then sends these boxes with resources and just so much there. She's done the legwork. I don't have to reinvent a wheel or make this stuff up. I'm very grateful to her for letting us support what she's doing, even though we're weird. We come from a different belief system, and that can be offensive to people sometimes. But you know what? Service crosses those boundaries, and so we're going to do that. I also brought yarn. Raise your hand if you know how to crochet, please. Tell me there's people here that crochet. Great. I brought yarn and little number 6 crochet hooks. I have no idea how to do this, you guys. So this is a very Relief Society. I'm like, except without the preparedness, I'm like, I've really been feeling it. Like, I should have this more together. And I haven't been able to do anything but just kind of bring it and be like, all right, people that know how to crochet, I brought you what you need. People that know how to sew, let's do this. People that don't know how to sew, we have a job for you too. So we'll do that a little later. So that's the intro to my project. And now I can stop worrying about that and talk about this instead. I'm going to invite each of you to consider standing. I'm going to list different types of maternal loss. I'm going to call it maternal loss, not just reproductive loss here. It could be paternal loss too. How about just loss, okay? If you or someone close to you has experienced this. So I don't want anyone to feel singled out like, she listed that one, I have to stand up now. I'm just going to list them, and I'm willing to bet everyone will be standing pretty quickly. So, infertility, miscarriage or abortion, a premature birth, stillbirth, children we lose through childhood disease, adult children who we lose before their time, or children who are disabled, children we've fostered children pretty much are always damaged in some way, or adopted, which also comes with a primal wound. My daddy was adopted and by very loving parents, but it hurt him. And we're grateful he was adopted, right? But it doesn't mean that it didn't hurt and that it didn't have effects on his children and my parenting as a mother because of that. Just throwing that out there. Postpartum depression, hormonal mood swings, just saying, those can get really dramatic. Public duty but private pain. I think of Emma a lot with that one. Childlessness, for any reason. Widows who have lost a spouse with or without children. Homelessness as a mother, single motherhood. Right? So I'm hoping that, with the exception of you, Michelle, you're going to help me in a different way. I was wondering if I could get 6 people who are willing to stand for a long time. Is there anyone willing to stand while we talk about each of these babies that Emma lost? She's 6. So if you're not up for standing, that's okay. And if you are, I'd love to have you come up and just pick up one of these names on the table. Okay, this is me completely improvising because I want to demonstrate and model that rituals are not ordinances necessarily, and that we can innovate and make them up as we go. Literally, I don't have this planned very well. And I finally concluded that's exactly what the Lord wanted, was to not overplan it, not overthink it, not look too put together. Thank you guys. Thank you. So what we're going to do is we're going to read each name, and these are in the order. So we're going to start with Alvin. Okay, well, I'm going to put you in order. The first to pass was Alvin, and then Thaddeus and Louisa, and then Joseph Murdoch, and then Don Carlos, and then an unnamed baby boy. Okay. Thank you so much for being willing to stand. I guess I have to stand, so. Okay, and this is the part where Michelle, if you could come help me. Michelle has done so much research on Emma that I haven't had the privilege of doing, and so my perspective is limited to pretty limited resources. I mostly got my information from it's called the Joseph Smith and Emma something website. And then what I did that maybe everyone else hasn't done is I put together like names and dates and went, how old was Emma when this child was born? How old was Emma when this child died? What do we know about the history going on around this? There's some surprising and devastating things going on in her life, and my historian friend here will then expound more because she knows more than I do. And so we'll start with the first loss, Alvin, which loss is always tragic, right? But maybe there's sometimes like some good stuff too. I know when we are closest to God is when the veil is thin, and when we give birth, our bodies break, and when our bodies break, the veil is thin. And I'm not going to qualify that. I'm going to let it be. And Emma nearly died giving birth to Alvin. And I'm just going to, so it was pointed out yesterday, I had not known this, that the plates were retrieved 9 months before this birth. And the 116 pages were lost before this birth, and new revelation had not yet been received about that until after this birth. And so there was this time that I imagine was pretty dark when, oh sweet, we have two mics, when Joseph and Emma not only lost the work of their lives, but lost their firstborn child. And I don't know, I'm going to let you talk about it. I just know that that would be like, I'd be asking, am I being cursed? Is there, am I being punished? Because that's how humans think. Maybe they're better than that, so. But go ahead and, you've got a mic right there.
Yep.
But, yeah. Tell us what you know.
Well, and I'm again qualifying. I'm just accepting the humiliation and not wearing my sunglasses. You can see how bad my eyes are today. But this broke my heart reading this story, and I haven't studied it for a little while, so I hope I get the details correct. But Emma was actually the scribe from, if not all, then most of those 116 pages. Oh, she wrote them with her own hand. She was his first scribe. This was before Oliver Cowdery had come. And so Emma, Joseph giving them to Martin Harris out of a desire to please both man and God, which I think all of us can relate to, right? Joseph didn't do something wrong. It was the goodness of his heart, and the Lord had a lesson to teach him. But yes, at the time that she was fulfilling this pregnancy and going into and giving labor, they were deeply concerned that Martin hadn't yet brought the manuscript pages back. Joseph had written to him numerous times, and they were waiting. And then they had their baby, and kind of like what I talked about yesterday, talk about thinking God is cruel, right? To have them lose their baby, and that could very much feel like because they had let the manuscript pages go, or
Right, like-
any other thing.
Both
Yes.
both creations have been aborted.
Right, exactly. And so Emma was actually on her deathbed for 3 weeks after this birth, that she was that sick for that long. And the body-mind connection, they had already suffered. She had lost her entire family, right? She had to choose between her family and Joseph, her husband, and I believe that the Lord helped inspire her to know which choice she needed to make, but her family could not accept her choice of husband. And so she was dealing with that immense loss and guilt and anger and hurt, all of those things, I would imagine. And then she also, there was one other thing I was going to say. Well, in any case, when she gave birth to this, they had already dealt with a lot of judgment from their community, their entire community as well. And then this was the other thing I was going to say. She had to move into the Smith's home, the Lucy and Joseph Sr. Smith home. And that was, I've read that was a challenge for her, and I can imagine that was a huge challenge too. She came from quite a bit of wealth. They were very well-to-do, the Hale family. So she moved into this overcrowded small cabin with all of her in-laws, not able to have much of their own space. I think by this time they had their own little place. And so Lucy and Joseph cared for her while she was on her deathbed. So Joseph also knew that the manuscript had not returned, and he'd lost his child, and now he was losing his beloved wife, is the spot that Joseph was in. When Emma finally began to recover, was able to speak again, the first thing she told Joseph was to go get the manuscript pages. So this bereaved mother dealing with her loss, I personally have come to the belief that during that 3 weeks, the Lord was probably very much communing with Emma and strengthening her, because the strength that she showed throughout the rest of her life, throughout the rest of her losses, which were immense, and the rest of her journey really shines through. And I think, I personally believe that the Lord was helping establish that strength and that knowing, that vision and understanding of her mission during that time.
Thank you. So, for Alvin Smith, if you take one of those roses and put it in one of those jars with his name next to it, Emma, we mourn your loss. It's okay to just put it down under it. It's all right. Thank you so much. All right, so that was 1828. Oh, and we didn't mention that baby. This is the midwife in me.
Right.
Baby lived for 3 hours. Mom almost didn't make it, so I'm guessing she had some severe hemorrhage.
I tend to think, because of my experience as well, I tend to think that he mostly had trisomy 13. We all know about trisomy 21, which is Down syndrome, because those are the babies that live. But trisomy 13, trisomy 18 are the next two most common. And those babies, they usually refer to those diagnoses as not compatible with life. And so Emma's complicated pregnancy, her very traumatic birth experience, her being so sick afterward, and the baby maybe having some deformities. That's just my personal clinical opinion as well.
Yeah, you know more on that topic than I do, actually. So, I personally experienced a birth where I kept bleeding in the postpartum, and I had a midwife friend. Us midwives are kind of woo-woo. She's like, have you considered that losing blood continually is like you're losing joy in your life? There's an emotional component, and so I can't help thinking that might have been going on for her, and I mourn that. Okay, so then you're supposed to have a rainbow baby next, right? But no. Instead, she had twins, and I don't know if these twins were born prematurely or not, but twins often are.
I believe
they were?
I believe so.
Okay. And they did, I read that they lived for 3 hours. So my assumption with twins is that they're premature, and today they would probably be fine because we'd have a midwife or a hospital that knows how to help with breathing. But those immature lungs would really struggle. And so sometimes premature babies are born and they look like they're breathing fine at first, and then they just start to fail slowly, and they just need a little support. And without that support that we have with modern technology, praise God, they don't always make it. So do you have any comments on the twins that they lost?
A few, but maybe I'll save them for the next one.
Okay, because within, I believe, depending on the stories you hear, the same day another set of twins was born nearby, and their mother died. And so I believe at 9 days is what I read, the father, John Murdoch, who was a member of the church and who remained a member his whole life, and served in the Utah branch of the church, he gave his babies up to Emma and Joseph to be raised by them. And so they named them Joseph Murdoch and Julia Murdoch Smith. And Julia was the first child that grew to adulthood, so she makes it. Should I share about Joseph Murdoch before you? No, I'll just share about Joseph Murdoch. I'll tell you what I know. This one was devastating to me. The details, we all kind of know this, but man.
Let me just share one thing about the twins. Is that all right?
Yes.
So often people talk about this as such a blessing, right? That like Emma lost her babies, but look, 2 more babies showed up. And I actually, if there are mothers who have experienced loss, we think of that story in the Bible of King Solomon, right? And the 2 women that were fighting over the baby. And King Solomon's test was to cut the baby in half. And one of the moms was like, yep, go ahead. That's just fine with me, right? Because actually this experience shows me Emma's incredible strength of character, because she had her beautiful little Louisa and Thaddeus. I love those names. And her second and third losses, and it really is double loss, losing twins. She wasn't knowing she was expecting them. So to give birth, when you give birth, you go through labor twice. You deliver one baby, and then you have to again labor, go through transition again to deliver the second baby, right? And they had these 2 babies that must have felt, I would imagine to some extent, like sort of a makeup for what had happened. Do you know what I mean? Kind of a
rainbow baby.
Right. It's like we got our new baby plus the baby we just lost. Like would have felt like that. And so to have those babies, to lose those babies, and then 2 new babies come and their mommy is dead. And I can only put myself in Emma's shoes to feel like, why did they get to keep their baby? Like, what is God doing? How is God so cruel? Because they weren't her babies, and it's not the same. It's not the same. And so to make the choice the day of her loss, in the midst of that grief, to be able to accept 2 new babies, to overcome the I can't even imagine the resentment that would just be naturally there, and to instead overlook your own loss, to accept these new babies and be willing to be a mother to 2 motherless children. It was not a makeup. It was not fixing the problem. It was adding to it in a way. And she had to make that incredibly difficult choice. That she probably felt like she didn't have a choice. But to me, I think we should honor Emma even more for being willing to do that instead of minimizing her loss because other babies came.
So before we move on to Joseph and Julia, let's honor Thaddeus. Thaddeus Smith. We honor your loss, Emma. And Louisa Smith. Emma, we honor your loss and your grief. And also honor what you must have gained by going through that on the level of character, going through what most of us never would have to go through. When I think of Emma, it's like you talked about yesterday, it's like, well, Emma got through this, so I can too. And actually that song I sang, I was blessed with that song when it came out, which was like 2007, I think. my parents gave me the CD that came on. I listened to it all the time and memorized it, and it really integrated into my soul. So when I then later went through difficult challenges, I was able to think about, I wasn't the first to go through difficult challenges, and I too could get through it. So thank you to Emma. This next child who passed, I really want to honor Joseph on. What an awesome father. What an amazing.
Do you mean John Murdoch?
Man. No, I'm thinking of Joseph.
Okay.
Joseph was up late at night when this baby was 11 months old, recovering from the measles, which back then was just a regular childhood disease that you sometimes survived and sometimes didn't. It wasn't quite as big a deal as people make it out to be now. It was a big deal, but he'd made it through. So presumably Julia made it through. But baby was still fussy and still recovering. And Joseph was up late at night walking that baby so that everybody else could sleep. They were in the Isaac Morley home.
And they actually had set up. They had set up, from what I have read, they had set up 2 rooms on the side of the stove so they could have steam going. So they were living in someone else's home again. Emma did not have a home, you know. And to have sick babies is so hard. To have sick twins
Guys.
is so hard. And then I speak from experience. And then, so they had Joseph in one room caring for baby Joseph, and Emma in the other room caring for baby Julia. I hope I'm remembering these details correctly, with the steam going to help the babies recover more quickly. So it's this amazing heartbroken story, but you don't understand. Like, remember sick babies and the lack of sleep, the exhaustion, the desperation to please just let them sleep because you're that tired. That was the state that Joseph and Emma were in when this happened.
So Joseph's doing the awesome stud man thing.
Yeah.
Of letting his wife sleep. Okay, I'm just gonna honor that. I have one of those husbands too, and he's awesome. That's for you, honey. And then
I don't know how much sleep she was getting.
Yeah, I don't know how much sleep, but he's the one who's walking the baby, and then that's the night the mob breaks in. They chased Emma out into the snow, threatening to rape her. They wrestled with Joseph. That man was tough. He had the kind of childhood that made you tough. He overcame so much, starting out weak and crippled, and then having all those brothers to wrestle with and doing all that hard farm work. Despite it all, he was tough. He was mentally tough. He was physically tough. And they were trying so hard. I think they were trying to pour poison into him, and they could not get his mouth open. They wrestled, multiple men wrestling with this guy. But he had to leave his baby in the house to deal with this assault on his family, and Sidney Rigdon's lying on the snow in his view, looking like he's dead in a pool of blood. He had chipped teeth for many years because he fought them off so hard. And you can fill in any details I'm missing. Finally, they tarred and feathered him, and they put tar in his mouth. They managed to do that and left him for dead. So, do you know anything more about that? Yeah.
So again, I need to freshen up on the details, but my understanding is that Emma took, I believe, both babies, but at least one of the babies, and ran and hid in the barn. So she had sick babies out in the cold, hiding in the barn. So she's being threatened with rape, and she's trying to protect her babies with nothing, hiding in the barn, thinking her husband is being killed. You can't, bad to worse, right? And she, anyway, and Joseph did, I believe, he had chipped teeth from the vial of poison they were trying to get into his mouth. And then they dragged him far away from the house, where they beat him and tarred and feathered him. So he was in and out of consciousness till he finally made his way back. And she thought that he was dead before. And then she was in the house trying to keep her babies alive, trying to help her sick babies recover from this exposure, massively traumatized again, and saw Joseph coming back, thinking that the tar was blood. So they thought Sidney was dead, and they thought Joseph was going to die any minute. So with that sleep deprivation, those sick babies, they spent that night scraping the tar from his skin painfully. Often the skin would just have to come with it. That is a cumbersome job, and they had to do that all night. And then the next day they had Sunday services, and Joseph got up and preached with his new lisp from his chipped teeth and probably the scarring and wounds all over him.
I would have drawn the line at going to church the next morning.
I don't know that Emma went. I hope, yeah.
He was definitely tough. But so the babies lived that night, but little Joseph Murdoch didn't make it. I think he died within a week or so, which must have been over the top after all their losses.
So we can just point out at this point, she's buried 4 children and has 1.
Yeah.
She's buried 4 and has 1 adoptive daughter.
Yeah, 1 daughter and 4 buried children. Fortunately, Julia was like a winning streak. So things started to get better, but I mean, this woman is already very traumatized. So let's see here. That was in 1831. November 6, 1832. They're in, let me point out that all of those happened in Kirtland, Ohio. If you'll recall, Joseph and Emma moved to Kirtland, and there was this big gathering of church members and building a temple, but they still didn't have their own home, right? They were in one place and then another place.
Can I share one more thing?
Yeah, go ahead.
Really quickly, in that time when she just had Julia, and I believe she was expecting her next, if I recall, a baby that lived, Joseph Smith III. That was so after the events in the Murdoch home. So they were staying with the Murdochs because Joseph had healed the mother from her rheumatic shoulder, I believe, and they were very converted, and they knew that that Emma and Joseph needed a place to live. That's why they came and invited them to their home. But their sons were deeply concerned and very resentful. So it was their sons that organized the mob to attack them, of the people they were staying with. And so Joseph, a little while later, when Julia was just, I think, toddler age and Emma was expecting, Joseph had to go out of town on a mission, and I think he was going with Newell Whitney. And I think that Joseph and Newell K. Whitney had arranged that Emma would stay with Elizabeth Whitney, who they were good friends. Newell K. Whitney became the bishop in I think, was he the bishop in anyway, he was the bishop of the church. My details I'm losing some of them. So Emma packed up her little bag and went with her little Julia to her good friend Elizabeth Whitney's house to stay. And when she knocked on the door, Elizabeth Whitney's aunt lived with them, who had cared for her kind of like a mother. Elizabeth had left her home as a young teenage girl and had lived with her aunt. This aunt was very opposed to the restoration and was very concerned that Newell and Whitney and Elizabeth were getting messed up in it. So the aunt rather harshly informed Emma, well, first of all, nothing hard on you men, but sometimes my husband will make arrangements and forget to pass the news on. So Joseph and Newell arranged that Emma was staying with Elizabeth, but it sounds like Elizabeth didn't get that message. And Elizabeth was sick and didn't know she was expecting Emma, and the aunt answered the door and told Emma that no, she could not stay with them. So Joseph is gone, and Emma and her little Julia have nowhere to stay, in addition to facing the humiliation. Emma was such a proper, I don't want to say proud woman, conscientious woman, right? She wanted everything done right. She never wanted to be a burden to anyone. So this mortified her so badly that she didn't talk about it ever for, I want to say, 20 years. And even when she spoke about it that much later, she still kind of got red and shaky and crying because it was such a mortification for her. And I don't even know the rest of the story, where she went and stayed, but she had to go either be homeless or beg somewhere to stay for her and her little daughter.
Ouch. Ouch. Okay. I relate to that. I mean, just mortifying things happening that you just feel like shame about because you were doing the right thing. Anyway. Okay, so next baby is born in 1832, right? Okay, so he's born Joseph Smith III. So they had Joseph Murdoch, and now they had Joseph Smith III. And Joseph Smith III lived. Boy, did he live.
And he was fantastic. Yes.
Yeah, it sounds like he was a really great guy from what I'm reading. I'm like, I didn't hear about this when I was growing up. I missed out on all the RLDS history, and there is some really great stuff that I used to feel an aversion to because I was like, well, that's the wrong church. Oh my goodness, I'm so past that now. I just want to read the stories and read about these remarkable people. So, Joseph Smith III is just about a year and a half younger than Julia. And then, things seemed like they were getting better in Kirtland. In March 1836, just a few weeks before Frederick, it's a long name, Granger Williams Smith was born, the beautiful Kirtland Temple was dedicated. And this was an amazing high for Emma that she talked about. And we heard some of that yesterday. So there were all these heavenly manifestations that attested to the fact that this was indeed a time when God's voice and power was being revealed to men and women on earth. And so it was soon after that, a couple months in June, that Frederick was born. So things were good, right? I'm just going to say this, y'all. I can't remember who said this, but if things are really good, just wait. And if they're really bad, just wait. Things always change. It's the one thing that's constant is change. And so things were so good. Anything to add about that? Okay. So, and then things got really bad. I guess I was headed in the right direction. Do you remember that story where Joseph gets a revelation that he and his family need to leave now? I think he and Oliver, or is it he and Oliver or he and Sydney? They took off and then arranged for their families to follow soon after. So their next baby was born in far west Missouri in 1838. 2 years later, Emma traveled from Kirtland to far west while in her third trimester of pregnancy, by my calculations. So 1838, that was a good one. Anything to say about that one? Nope, just that's all the good stuff, right?
Well, the Kirtland Safety Society was
terrible. The history was that the Kirtland Safety Society fell, and then everyone called Joseph a fallen prophet because money got involved.
It was hard. Yeah,
hard times for everybody, I guess. Okay, so then Don Carlos Smith is born on June 13th, 1840. And this is a baby that gets lost, but not until he is 14 months old. So he is the delightful little toddler walking around the house, delighting everybody. This baby stayed, right? Not like her other babies. She'd never lost a baby. Well, she lost her 11-month-old, to be fair. She'd gone through that once, and that was enough. And right before Don Carlos passes, they're actually, hold on, like so much got skipped here. Far west Missouri to Nauvoo, Illinois. Just think through all that happened between far west and Nauvoo. They've been through a lot, and then they had this baby. And I don't know if y'all remember, but Nauvoo had sickness issues. So there was a sickness that swept through the city, and it took Joseph's brother, Don Carlos, who his son was named for, and then just a few weeks later, their little baby passed as well. And it was devastating to Emma, and by my calculations, when that happened, did I write this down right? She was in her third or fourth month of pregnancy with her next baby. Bear with me here, because we're going to lose two of them at this. Well, okay, let's go ahead and honor Don Carlos before I move on, because it just gets worse. Don Carlos, we honor you, and we grieve you. Go ahead. There's a lot about Don Carlos, actually.
Were you going to share more?
Nope, you go ahead, and then I will go on to the next thing.
Okay, because if you're going to get to it.
Mm-mm.
Okay. So yes, Don Carlos. So malaria was sweeping through Nauvoo. Nauvoo wasn't actually a marsh or a swamp like we're always told. There were areas of swamp that they had to drain, just small areas, but enough to breed enough mosquitoes to make malaria be a constant threat. So this is the time when Emma, and again, she has these babies, she's pregnant, and she is caring for all of the sick people. She had been trained in herbal skills, and she was quite an advanced herbalist, and she was very much a healer by both her nature and her training. And a hostess and a caregiver. So she had all kinds of sick people coming into their house. Like, for example, the Whitney family, according to Elizabeth's later biography, they were living in pretty bad conditions, all sick with malaria. So Joseph and Emma had them come and build they built them a little cottage in their yard that they could live that would be healthier. And she fit as many in the little house they were living in as she could, as she cared for all of these people. And this is when she has her own children who are sick, and she has to say, I'm sorry, I'm caring for all of these other people. I don't know if Emma got sick or if she was protected. I haven't read that she got sick. But yes, it was malaria that took the uncle, Don Carlos, Joseph's little brother, and then a little while later, her little darling toddler, like you said. What a tender age. And not like there's a good age to lose a child, but Emma did say that Don Carlos was her hardest of all of her losses, because she knew she had had so much time to bond with him. And in the final dream, were you going to talk about that?
No, that was beautiful yesterday. Go ahead.
Yeah, we heard it yesterday, but yes,
it's worth repeating.
Just a little while before she died, she had a dream where she saw Joseph in heaven and went to the cradle. He told and picked up her darling little baby, her little Don Carlos, and she said, "But Joseph, where are my other children?" He said, "Be patient. You will have them. You will have them all." And I'm sure that it was told better yesterday because it wasn't just from memory. But Don Carlos really was I think that was the point where you can see the grief on Emma's face throughout. And this, I think, was one of the points where it was too much all along. But at this point, her grandchildren would talk about how much they loved their wonderful grandmother, but they would also talk about how they would just see her sitting in a chair with tears. Even into her old age, she just carried so much grief for so many years.
And so I suspect that's why she didn't name her next loss. I think she was just so traumatized. But it gets worse.
Well, we don't know how far along he was.
We don't know how far along it was. That's true. We don't know if she was pregnant when she lost Don Carlos, or if that was just an early stillbirth, like 20 weeks. I don't know. But what I do know is that she was called as Relief Society president on March 17th, 1842, and she was less than 6 weeks postpartum
from her loss.
From that loss, and still not recovered from the loss of Don Carlos. Like, that's when that happened. This was a woman weighed down by the world, indeed. I can't imagine.
I can speak to that, though. Mm-hmm. I actually think that was a tremendous blessing. Yeah. Because when loss and grief is so heavy, purpose
That's true.
Is one of the best, I can't say cures, but one of the best treatments. What's the word I'm looking for? One of the best things that can...
A way to process?
Yeah, it's so helpful to have purpose. That's a good thing for all of us to remember.
That's true.
In life. Anytime there's grief, purpose is the very best remedy for the depths of grief. And I think the fact that the Relief Society was organized and the women called Emma to be the president and sustained her like they did, and that Joseph blessed and sustained her in that calling, I think that was actually an outpouring of love toward this tremendous woman that they all loved so much, to honor her. And then if you read her talk that she gives about the purpose of Relief Society and what they are going to do, and her heart being turned, I don't think it ever was not turned, but being actively turned toward caring for the suffering, caring for the needs, and toward empowering the women, because they always were fighting this immorality that was, John Bennett and others that were just deceiving women. So they wanted to empower the women so they couldn't be deceived, and they wanted to care for the needy. And so Emma's grieving heart was filled with that purpose, and I see that as a beautiful, beautiful sisterhood that was sustained by her husband, all of them wanting to do anything they could to help Emma. When you have a loved one going through grief, you so desperately want to take it away. You so desperately want to solve the problem, and you feel so helpless. The best thing you can do is sit with them, and you just want to solve the problem, right? So I think that this actually was a beautiful healing thing for that entire community to come up with a way to bless and strengthen Emma and give her purpose and life in her losses. Which is beautiful. Part of why it's so despicable that we say that they were all betraying her in the midst of that Joseph was actually married to all of these women. That's why it's so offensive. Not the only reason, but it's one reason that it's especially offensive.
Right. I love that perspective, that they were honoring her and inviting her to remember who she is. I had to have that talk with a sister once in the depths of postpartum depression and remind her, you forget who you are when you're feeling like that. You forget your strength and your purpose, and so thank you for that. I'm just here as the naive first impression person. Like I told you yesterday, I'm just looking at this, and so I appreciate that perspective. And that's something I'm really struck with as I listen to the women speaking today, is that I'm just barely on the wisdom journey. I'm just barely starting to learn this. So, Emma, for your unnamed child, our little baby boy Smith, I hope you've named him. I hope you've named him. We honor your loss. All these lost babies. Emma had just one more child. 11, that's a lot. I have a whole next page for him. I'm just kidding, it's one little line. So this was the child that really drew me into this whole search, because I named my 7th child Hiram David, and as I was lying postpartum in my bed, in the midst of midwifery training, which my classes started the day after I gave birth, so I was up at 2 a.m. on my phone looking at my syllabuses. Anyway, so I was full in it, and I was pondering though. I was like, Hiram David, didn't Joseph and Emma have a child with a name like that? And so that's what got me started, because then I started thinking, well, goodness, I wonder, how did she lose all these babies? How did she lose them all? Which I'm not going to get into right now, but any more than we already have. David Hiram, okay, I have to speak to this though, because of my own experience in, gosh, you guys, not just my own life, not just my family's lives or my ancestors, but my community and my clients. Postpartum depression is real. Pregnancy depression is real. Emma was 4 to 5 months, 4.5 months pregnant. That affected her unborn child. And I don't mean to be blaming. I just want to acknowledge that couldn't not affect the baby, because that baby is in her space, and her space is devastated. And I've seen this in other situations, and things happen, and things come up later. So when David Hiram was a little baby, he was the delight of the family. He wasn't like a sad baby. He was actually the youngest of 7, because after Emma remarried, she had 2 stepchildren. So he grew up kind of this happy child with 6 older siblings that all doted on him and loved him. And he was gifted. He was a gifted person. He had a beautiful voice and a keen intellect. He wrote a book of poetry that was published when he was in his young 20s. And he was very spiritually inclined, and joined his brother Joseph Smith III and went on missions out to Utah and faced down Brigham Young, or at least dealt with them. I don't think he wasn't the kind of guy that got in someone's face. Brigham did that. He just bore it and then went, what the heck? How dare you say that about my mother? But he was polite to his face. So you probably have more to say on this, but David Hiram suffered with incredible mental illness pretty soon. I think he was 32. After about 7 years of really wrestling with mental illness, he started to become violent with it, And Joseph Smith III had to make the hard final decision of, we have to put my brother in an asylum. Emma called it her living trouble. That was 1877, and Emma died in 1879. So it was just a couple years, but she dealt with that. And he only had, he had one son before things got too crazy, and that son had 3 sons, and none of whom had any children. One died, and the one adopted, and the other just chose not to have children because they were worried that it was like genetic and that they'd pass it on. That's what I read anyway. Do you have more to say on David Hiram? He's kind of my favorite.
Okay. Yeah, it was traumatic. Yes, Emma was 4.5 months pregnant-ish with him when Joseph was killed. And like I spoke about before, she wasn't able to just be a grieving mother and be supported in her grief. She immediately had to go to battle. And it's like, you imagine those nightmares where, at least I've had nightmares like this in my life, where you think there's someone that's helping you and all of a sudden they turn around and you realize that's the bad guy that's coming to get you. That kind of happened to Emma from the best that I can sense. The people that she thought she could trust or rely on, or at least were going to be fair, she realized they were the enemy. And it, like, I cannot imagine being a bereaved pregnant mother trying to take care of all of your children, plus your mother-in-law who is elderly and crippled and needing help as well, while having to fight head-on with Brigham. Like, he was sending their house, they attempted to light her house on fire multiple times. They were desperate to get all of her papers. They came and carried the desk that was in her house out of her house. She luckily had kept some of the papers. The big battle was over the translation of the Bible, Joseph's translation of the Bible, which someone pointed out to me, man, it is a good thing she kept it, because that's one of the strong evidences of what Joseph really believed and who he really was. Specifically, the part I'm thinking about is how he talked about David, King David, and he always minimized him and minimized his righteousness, just like he did in the Book of Mormon. And so we most likely would have had an altered, forged version of it. And since they couldn't get it, they tried to light her house on fire multiple times while she and her children were in it. At least that was her perspective. They threatened to do it, and then she would walk out and see where a fire had been started in the night and luckily had gone out on its own, or she and her children would have been burned. And she bore her strong testimony that she knew that as long as she was preserving the Bible, that she and her children would be safe. And so she's pregnant, grieving, having to deal with the financial nonsense that they were doing. And also, they put armed guards around her home under the auspices of protecting her, but it was actually to watch her and to torment her. She wasn't allowed to go anywhere. Like, this is the conditions that she was living under in Nauvoo after her husband had been killed while she was pregnant. And it goes on from there. It's unbelievable. And the financial battles, I won't get into all of the details, but she was really deceived and left high and dry. And what basically happened was most of the assets of the church were taken. Well, Brigham tried to take all of them. He couldn't manage to get all of them. Like the temple, he couldn't manage to sell it, although he was trying to. And it was really the Strangites, Jacob String, who prevented that from happening. But the best evidence I can see is that Brigham, since he couldn't sell it, he had it burned down, because that burned, and that was a loss to the entire community, especially to Emma, who lived right there in the shadow of it. To have the temple burned down must have been another huge loss. And so all of this was happening. Joseph Smith III wrote about Joseph and Emma used to do parades through the town, and they would ride on their horses in a parade. And Brigham, as he was trying to step into that position, wanted to borrow Joseph's horse on one occasion. So Emma sweet Emma, like let him borrow the horse. Maybe this was before she knew how bad it was. And so Brigham rode Joseph's horse through the street as really a symbol to all of the people, right? And then I don't know what happened, but it sounds like they took the horse and ran it about to death and then returned it. And that's when Joseph Smith III realized that these were not their friends, because they had tried to, they returned the horse in horrible shape. Joseph Smith III was almost 12 when his father was killed, so he knew who his parents were. Right? And so it is true that later on in life, Emma did attribute David's mental illness to she said, the trouble that I experienced. So, and anyway, I want to say more. David was also an artist. In fact, you'll hear the missionaries in Nauvoo talk about how the story is that Joseph did the temple in the upper room of the red brick store in May of 1842. And they talk about how there was a mural on the wall that was trying to imply that that was similar to the murals in the Creation Room in the Salt Lake and the St. George Temple and the other Utah temples. But when they did an archaeological study, they actually have known this for a long time. They did an archaeological study of the red brick store, and they found the painting of the mural, and it was done far after the saints left and came to Utah, and the best explanation of it is that it was David Hyrum who painted a pastoral scene while he was living in the upper room of the red brick store. I think that he was one of those very sensitive artists, and it is true, the mind and body connection. And so I'll just share really quickly. I have a child who, while we were pregnant with him, we were facing homelessness, as well as many, we had a job loss and a business loss, and we had purchased a home in the meantime during the financial crash of 2008 that we were going to refinance as soon as we could, but instead all of that happened. So we were devastated financially, and there were other really hard things going on as well. And the stress that I experienced, that child is smaller than all of the rest of my children by a lot. And also hard, just a hard personality. And I think that there is something about a mother's body sends the signals to the child. And so this child is coming to a world that's hard to survive in. So you have to fight for survival, and you have to, do you know what I mean? And I guess I want to bring that up because it's really, I dealt with for a long time when I realized that this might be, like I did this to my child, can be the feeling. Right, but what you realize is no, these are the circumstances that this child was born into, and God established all of the circumstances, right? And our bodies do send our children gifts of signals of how they need to exist in this world. Even their microbiome and their, like everything about, there's just this interplay between mother and baby. And so it's good to remember that that's actually a gift. And I think that child, he's also one of the most resilient people I know. He can take a hit and just recover and keep on going. I don't mean just a physical hit. I mean like hard things that he has experienced, and they don't get him down like you would expect. And I think those traits will serve him very well. So I'm a big advocate for never having mom guilt. Like, we are absolutely doing the best we can. And again, it's God's problem. All of it is God's problem, right?
I know a woman who her patriarchal blessing told her she would be the perfect mother. And that just redefined perfect mothering for me. Because I knew her. And I was like, well, God must have a different idea of perfection in mothering then. But she once told the bishop's wife that, and that woman never talked to her again. She was like, well, if you're the perfect mother, what am I?
Don't you?
People are crazy.
Don't you think it means the perfect mother for her children? Don't you think we're all the mother our children need?
We're going to mess my kids up in the perfect way, right? Accept that.
God chose who to send. So again, I can just tell my kids, I know you hate me right now, but take it to God. It's his fault.
I'm like, you chose me.
It's God's fault. It's their fault.
We don't have to blame anybody, but yeah. Yeah, I once was worried about having a pregnancy around a difficult person in my life, and my friend looked at me and she was like, honey, if they can't handle it on the inside, they ain't got no business being born. And I was like, well, I guess that's one way of looking at it. I mean, it's not like life is easy. Thank you, Michelle. Yes, thank you so much. I feel like inviting her added a lot. I had a song that I actually had hoped to incorporate into our ritual, but I spaced it. But I would just like us to have a little, few minutes of silence Well, we listened to this song, and I just want us to, if everyone could just say a prayer for Emma, and then also for ourselves, and for anyone and everyone we know who has some losses to process. And then we are done after that, and it's on to food and doing our service projects. So you'll hear more from us. Thank you.